Possible GTA suspect there now, 4730 Crystal Springs Drive in the parking lot above
They're
the
playing my
merry-go-round.
song.
Female, self-led description, adding striping to a black Cadillac four-door, possibly exchanging plates, vehicle license.
It's great to have everybody here this evening on this amazing Sunday evening. A day of rest, a day of worship, and a day to talk about true crime and the adversary. Got a great show ahead for you tonight. Give it a couple of minutes, let folks get in here. I want to thank our mods, Teresa M, Maui Girl, Mimi J2, Sophia, and Laura. I don't know about you, but they are the best mods in the business. I love it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And more importantly as well, our subscribers, that's all we ask. Hit that subscribe button. That's it. Welcome to the interview room at that moment. Boom. That really helps us. 2025 is going to be an amazing year. It's already started off with some craziness. I think we can all agree on that. But there is hope at the end. And I'm hoping tonight that the JonBenet Ramsey case is solved and that everybody steps back and goes, what just happened? I am praying that this year this case gets resolved and solved. Because I know, as you know and feel, and I think you hopefully are thinking the same thing I'm thinking, that if this case gets solved and it was perhaps nothing like anybody was thinking, then there will be some, not only justice, but mercy will be brought to the table. So hopefully we get some great results. I want to, also ask you what you guys think about, this truck thing in New Orleans. Our prayers and thoughts go out to them, to the people of New Orleans, to the victims down there. And then, of course, this Green Beret guy at the, the Trump Tower in Las Vegas. My goodness, I mean, that's unfolding as we sit here. The Las Vegas Metro just read, some more information about that. I mean, Vegas in the last couple of years has just been having some crazy stuff. Scary times for sure. Scary times, Jitter Girl. No question about it. Well, I hope you guys had a great time with the crew, with Dr. Picato and everybody on New Year's. We sure did, with Josh, myself, and Dr. Picato. I mean, that was a fun time. And man, oh man, is his collection absolutely off the hook? If you've not seen that, we did a New Year's Eve hangout together, and that was the longest, the longest broadcast I've ever done. And thank you, Victoria. We really appreciate that. It lasted 5 hours, and I was like, well, maybe, maybe that's a little long, but we did it, and we had a great time. And Dr. Bricado opened up his secret door and showed us a lot of his fantastic, amazing artifacts that he has from, people from all over the true crime community. I mean, when we talk about true crime, it's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to, bring to the table a letter from the people you're talking about. And that's what I love about him. He's just like peeling an onion, and every time you peel, you get a piece of the onion off, you get that, oh my gosh, I can't see look. And he's that guy. He's that guy. So if you get a chance, even if it's just, watching the first half of it, where Dr. Bricado shows all of his artifacts. I mean, he's got letters from Jeffrey Dahmer and all kinds of, weirdness in there, but he's fun, and he's brilliant, and we love him for it. So we're always grateful to have him in the Cold Case Foundation. So tonight, what are we going to talk about on this Sabbath day? Well, I thought we would, as promised, I would revisit some of the police reports from the JonBenet Ramsey case, and I wanted to, approach it from a perspective of, what's appropriate protocol, what the mistakes could be, and then, of course, just talk about it with you. Those of you who had an opportunity to see the last program we did, we talked about the garrote, Dr. Bricado and myself, and we talked about the type of personality that would utilize a garrote. And Gary weighed in on that. And his assessment on that, you can go back, like I said, and watch that video. But, I think there's a lot of opinions, both, in the law enforcement community as well as in the legal community, i.e. the courts, the DA's offices, et cetera, and about whether or not things were appropriate or what went wrong, what went right. And, it's our responsibility in the law enforcement communities around this country just to say it the way it is. I mean, we saw some of that goofiness, take place during the truck situation in New Orleans just this week, where you've got the FBI come out and go, well, this isn't a terrorist act, yet the guy's flying a flag. Here's a hint. Okay? And then you have shortly thereafter the chief, who was from Oakland PD in California. She's now in New Orleans. And then you have the mayor, and they're all saying, no, wait a minute, this is a terrorist, this is an event, okay, a terror event. And all of a sudden, this mix mash comes up, and then you see this breath of fresh air come out of the, Las Vegas metro, where they stand up and they say, here, read it for yourself. This is what the guy said. This is what the guy did. And, oh, by the way, this is the guy's name, and, et cetera. It's not really rocket science, right? I mean, it's not rocket science. And thank you, Melissa. You are so kind. So tonight, I'm just gonna be right. I'm from the old school of just, it is what it is. And you can't make this stuff up, to the public. You've got to say what you did from a law enforcement perspective, and you got to say why you did it. And it's that simple. And so I want to take you back to, 1996 on December 26th again. And I also want to, just in full disclosure, those of you, who've been following this channel for quite some time, I was actually contacted by my department to work with Lou Schmidt from Boulder to help find a gentleman that was in the area at the time of this incident. He had come out to Southern California, and my expertise has been, and for many years, is, those who take the life of children for gratification, SA gratification. And that's been my situation for almost 42 years now. And you can imagine Karen and I don't get invited to very many dinner parties. I mean, we laugh. I mean, we have a lot of friends at church and, and stuff, and I love them to death. But I really don't tell them, the totality of what, I do. It's, because then you won't get invited back to anything. I'm teasing, of course. But that said, so I had in-depth conversations with the Boulder DA's office back in the day. And then it was eventually leaked out that our agency was involved, as well as other agencies. Remember, he had that list of, names that he wanted to flush through because his theory was it was a stranger. He was very adamant about it. My job was just to try to find that guy and ultimately package it up, which we did, and send it back to him. So I don't have a dog in this fight. I do find and have found, and you see Buddy behind me running around. Everybody can see him through the microphone here. He's running around. What are you doing, you goofball? He's chasing his toys behind me. It's always great to have Bud in the house. And he loves to come into the office here and, just do this craziness behind us. He breaks it up for us, all of us. But anyway, that's full disclosure. So I heard everything that was said from him. And then, of course, he was concerned about the garage as a whole. And he asked if you could find this guy. We packaged up the information we came up with and sent it back to Boulder. So that said, I'm going to approach this tonight from the perspective of the phone rings. You get an assignment from whoever's on the other side of the phone, and then you respond as an investigator. And, for clarity of focus, this is my case file. Okay? So these are the murders and these are the cases that I have responded to and worked. Over 300 murders, about another 200 natural suicides, etc. I had quite an interesting career with a lot of volume. And I learned a lot. And I made mistakes. I got blamed for stuff that I didn't do. This whole book here was written about a case that I was involved in. Okay? And there are people on the internet today that still think that, I'm a bad dude. Okay? Which I totally, they don't quite do their homework, but that's okay. They're entitled to their opinion. But I'm not that guy. So I'm going to approach this, like I said, tonight, from this perspective of, okay, well, what do we have here? Okay, because whenever you get on a scene as an investigator, the first thing you do is you round up the troops and you say to yourself, and them. What do we got? What's going on? Okay. And you debrief the first responding officer who is on the scene, and you want to get their take. What did they see? What did they feel? What is their, what did they smell? What did they bring into the scene? What have they taken out of the scene? And so you want to circle up. We call that a circle up. You want to circle up with these guys and gals, and you say, okay, what's your gut? Do we have witnesses? If so, who are they? What's their involvement, if any? What's the situation? And so we try to, break that down pretty quickly, and you end up getting a tremendous amount of information. Okay. So I'm going to approach this, like I said, straight up. These are the reports that were written for the JonBenet Ramsey case. I'm going to talk about two of the responding officers. One, the detective, whose picture is on the thumbnail tonight. And as a result of that, okay, this is also the responding officer. And we're going to go over this together. And then I'm going to give you my insight, and I hope in return that you share with me what your insight is. So this is what they would call an officer's report. It's a supplemental, says right up here, field report, narrative supplemental. And we used to call these 153s. Okay? And Boulder and Colorado probably has a different name for it. But what a 153 is you want that officer, they learn in the police academy, you put down as much information as you can recall when you first got here, and make sure, number one, it's truthful. Number two, it's in that truth is accuracy, because at some point that officer is going to be placed on the stand, their hand's going to be put up, okay, and they're going to be asked, tell us what happened. So this is a narrative format. You can see here the officer even called it a narrative because that's the way they're trained in the academy. And so there's a couple of things here I want to go over. And what I want to do is I want to follow the timeline, okay? Every time we see a time, I'm going to write it down in front of me and just see if things are lining up, number one, okay? So what we would do as investigators in the roundup is you sit there and you take notes in your little notebook that you have, okay? I'll show you mine. Hang on. I've had this thing for a gazillion years, but it's a tri-fold notebook. Back in the day, you could actually put Polaroids in here if you wanted to. That, business cards, stickies, highlighters. This is a flashlight with a laser in it. And then, of course, your notebook on what's going on. You title it up here with the date and time, and then everything you did and everything that you get debriefed on. And then you can put, other little pockets in here. But this is a tool. It's a tool, okay? And it's a great one because you will be asked on the stand, okay? And today with digital cameras, you don't need the old school, okay? But the lead investigator needs as much information that they can get, because at that point you have to remember that you're just a very small potato chip. And this is why we tell investigators, and why all good investigators know, that, you check the ego at the door, because this is not about you. Okay? You're just the instrument in God's hands, or, in my opinion, we work for God. So we were just instruments in God's hands. And you follow the information. You don't chase the person. You follow information. Information, by asking the words why, leads you to the hows and the whats. Okay? What happened and how did it happen? By focusing on why did it happen. Okay? And once you recognize that as an investigator, then you're also willing to say, you know what, I made a mistake. I can't tell you how many times I've been on the stand where a great defense attorney doing their job has said, Detective McDonough, did you make a mistake? And I would say, absolutely. Or, no, I didn't. And here's the reason why. Okay. And you're able to, back that up based on your behavior. So in this particular case, let's follow the timeline, okay, and see where we go here. So I respond, a narrative. I responded to 755 15th Street in the city and county of Boulder, Colorado at approximately 0555. So that's 0555, 5:55 a.m. Hours on the 26th of December, 1996 on a report of a possible kidnapping. Upon arrival, I met with a distraught Patricia Ramsey and her husband, John. John advised me that their 6-year-old daughter, JonBenet, was missing and that their 9-year-old son, Burke, was asleep upstairs. So this officer tells us right from the get-go that he runs into the parents, and the parents say, our son's upstairs sleeping, and our daughter's missing. Okay. JonBenet was missing, and their 9-year-old son, Burke, was asleep upstairs. John directed me through the house and pointed out a 3-page handwritten note, which was laid on the wooden floor just west of the kitchen area. Okay? So let's go to the house. Oops. I think I just messed that up. All right. All right. Can everybody see that? Yep. Let me make it a little bit bigger. Okay. So the officer says John directs him through the house, okay, and points out a ransom note. So number 1 is ransom notes right here by the spiral staircase up at the top. Number 2 is the notepad, which is right here on a countertop. Number 3 is a flashlight, which is over here in the kitchen. Number 4 are the basement stairs, which is down here, over here, through the kitchen, down on the bottom. Number 5 is the ransom note and pen, which was where it was sitting when he got in there. And number 6 is the metal grate over the window downstairs in the basement area. Okay, and I don't have that one up tonight, but we went over that the other day, and I have that that I can show you here in a second. Okay, so here he points out a 3-page handwritten note which was laid on the wooden floor just west of the kitchen area. Okay. He told me that his wife had found the note on the bottom step of the spiral staircase, which was number 1 we just showed, which led to the upper levels of the house. He puts in parentheses, I'm uncertain about who moved the note, in parentheses. The note advised the Ramseys that their daughter was in the possession of a group of suspects and demanded a ransom of $118,000 to be delivered by a means detailed to them later in a subsequent telephone call. All right. I spoke with Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey while Burke continued to sleep. Okay, so this officer will testify at some point, if this case is solved, was Burke asleep? That will be the question from the defense. And if the answer is yes, okay, which will correlate to his report, okay, then as an investigator, what do you do with that information? Okay, you write it down, just like he did, that Burke was asleep. Mrs. Ramsey told me that she had gone into JonBenet's room at about 05:45. So now we got a second time, which is approximately 10 minutes before he got the call. So you got a 10-minute time frame here. To wake her in preparation for a short trip the family was to take later that day. She found JonBenet's room empty and then discovered the note as she walked down the stairs. She immediately called the police. A quick inspection of the interior of the house. So, rule number one, every law enforcement officer, and those of you who are serving, and those of you who have served, please put into the chat what your feelings are about what I'm going to say. Rule number one, missing kids, you go through every single crevice of that house. Every single one of them. It does not matter. You look under couches, you lift up cushions, you just absolutely go through that house top to bottom. Top to bottom. Okay. Now, the reason for that is you're taught in the academy to do that. You're taught by your field training officer to do that. So this officer says he does a quick inspection of the interior of the house. Now, what he's doing, and I'm not going to criticize him for any of that, is he does a quick walkthrough to see what he can see. Okay. As well as talking to Mr. Ramsey. So he talks to Mr. Ramsey. Now, what's confusing to me is he doing this with Ramsey at the time? Because he says a quick inspection of the interior of the house, as well as talking to Mr. Ramsey, indicated that there was no obvious signs of forced entry or struggle. So did Ramsey say, yeah, go, do whatever you want to do? And he does this quick walkthrough. Mr. Ramsey told me that the house appeared to be locked up as it had been left. The Ramsey have an alarm system inside the house which was not engaged, as is normal for them. So this was a normal behavior for the Ramseys to go to bed and not set their alarms. Okay? And this is what the officer's saying. They have a small dog, but he had spent the night with a neighbor across the street, which is also not unusual because they're leaving the next morning to go to Michigan. Mom's up at 05:45 in the morning. Maybe she was being considerate of the neighbor, and they just thought, you know what, let's just drop the dog off so we don't have to wake them up. Just as a thought. The Ramseys have an alarm system inside the house, which was not engaged, as is normal. They have a small dog, spent the neighbor across the street with the neighbors, which is also normal. Both Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey stated they had not heard anything unusual during the night, as there was no initial refuting evidence. I advised Sergeant Reichenbach that it was possible an actual kidnapping, and we proceeded to control the scene as such, which Sergeant Reichenbach paged advocates, detectives, and crime scene investigators. Now, this is important because this officer is writing this report post the discovery of JonBenet. And this is the first indication you see of him saying, we were thinking it was a kidnapping initially. In line 24, I advised my sergeant that it was possibly an actual kidnapping. And this was before her body was found. So immediately, this officer is thinking, JonBenet could be kidnapped here. Okay. And then he writes this report and justifies why he was thinking that way initially. Okay. Everybody tracking me here on this one? All right. Within 15 minutes, blank and blank and blank, all friends of the Ramseys arrived at the house. Now, what's happening on the other side of the coin here is Mrs. Ramsey, Mr. Ramsey are calling their friends and families and saying JonBenet's missing. And the officer at the time, officer who wrote this report, was in agreement. There's not a flag there yet for him. Okay? And by this time, friends are arriving at the house by 0650, third time. So you have, within an hour, friends are at the house. By 0650, Officer Weiss and Officer Barklow were photographing and fingerprinting areas of the house. Now, this is a possible kidnapping, they're thinking. And immediately you have a note that says, we'll call you with the next steps. And so what the officers are doing is putting into motion, though, evidence collection. Evidence collection in relationship to, you have all these people coming over, and they're breaking out their fingerprint powder at 0650 and their photography. Okay, correct protocol would have been put a piece of tape up at the door. Nobody in at this point, okay, because this is a crime scene. This is a crime scene. What kind of crime? In California, we call it a 207, a kidnapping. A kidnapping for ransom. So immediately you want to be on the phone and you want to start gathering resources. But they should have shut this thing down before 6:50 a.m. And there is no way they should have been in there collecting evidence yet. They should have secured the house, got everybody to a better place, keep one family member in a secured area inside the house to answer the phone, which would have been Mr. Ramsey. You would have gotten Mom, you would have gotten Burke, and you would have gotten everybody out of the house. Because they're in there throwing powder around, and they're simultaneously having people walk around, touching stuff, and who knows what the cross-contamination is. We don't know. If this is an abduction from her bedroom, is that a high, medium, or low-risk activity in the victim risk continuum? Right? It is a very low activity. In fact, this is another Elizabeth Smart situation, but this was the first one, okay, hypothetically. So a very low-risk situation. So this whole situation immediately, that officer should have said, okay, time out. Okay, where's her bedroom? It's upstairs. Okay, don't anybody go into that bedroom. What else? What's her habit pattern when she wakes up in the morning? Well, she goes into the kitchen. She has, blah, blah, blah. Okay, perfect. Nobody go in the kitchen. Where's the note? Well, it's over here, officer. Okay, great. Don't touch it. Nobody touch anything. Okay, everybody good? Yes, okay. Mrs. Ramsey, you need to go with your friends. Come on, let's go. Mr. Ramsey, please sit here. Don't move. Okay. And everybody out of the house. Tape comes up. No evidence people start coming in yet because now you have control of that house. That officer is the first responder and he has control of that house until he turns it over. Okay. Until they turn it over. So now you have Officer Vitek had collected the ransom note. Okay. Reverend whoever of St. John's Episcopal Church in Boulder came to the house at 0713. So mom wakes up at 0545, and by 713, you have a house full of people. Okay. Joining victims' advocates, and that means those are police personnel. Okay. So the police have added, they keep adding resources into this situation. Okay. Rule number one, you have 3 hours in a missing and abducted child case to make sure that you have made hundreds of decisions correctly. Within the first hour, we already have a lot of cross-contamination going on here. A lot of potential cross-contamination. Now, is that his mistakes? Are these his mistakes? I think in retrospect, he would tell you today, I wish I wouldn't have done that. So the answer, probably from this officer, would be yes. If he was asked on the stand, and if this case is ever solved, you can bet the defense is going to ask him, what did you do? And what didn't you do? And what should you have done? And just like in Koberger's case, you know, they're going to have to drop 25 expert witnesses to either refute it or to say, yeah, there needed to be something different here. Okay. So now, in the house with the others, detectives Linda Arndt and Fred Patterson arrived at the house at about 0810. So the first time a call is 055, or let's say 6 a.m. 2 hours and 10 minutes later, the first detectives arrive on the scene. Okay? And guess what? He puts in line 7 here, I was concerned with gathering information from Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey. They told me that what's his concern? What's his concern? To me, that's an expression of confidence level. Okay. It's an expression of confidence level that he doesn't really know what's going on and he's following his gut, but he doesn't know this. And remember, he's writing this after the body has been discovered. So he's also looking in retrospect of the woulda, coulda, shouldas. What should I have done? What could I have done? And here we see that expressed here. He says, I was concerned with gathering information from Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey. They told me that they had spent Christmas night with the blank family, with the whoever's they are, and that they arrived home at 2200 hours, as in 10 o'clock at night. Mr. Ramsey said he read to both kids for a short time, and then they were in bed by 22:30. So by 10:30 at night, according to the father's statement, the children are in bed. Okay. Now, this is something that is kind of both concerning and both revelatory, for lack of a better term. Mr. Ramsey said that JonBenet had been dressed in a white long underwear and a red turtleneck. Now, there are thousands of people that have made this a big deal because she's not in a turtleneck, okay, a red turtleneck. However, she is in white long underwear. Okay. So he got a 50% on that. Does that mean that raises a suspicion? To me, that's not a huge red flag, because eyewitness testimony, and specifically parents, it's Christmas, I get my kids' clothing wrong all the time. Okay? So let's just be, remember, let's balance out that moment, what the officer's listening to. And he says, well, what is she wearing? What were they wearing? What's also interesting here is he doesn't put what Burke was wearing. He only puts what JonBenet was wearing, which, should have been kind of also a follow-up question of, well, what was Burke wearing? Okay? And where was Burke? There should have been a lot more information about Burke here, because if his sister is abducted out of that house, wasn't he a potential soft target as well? Right? Wasn't he susceptible to the same group, hypothetically, based on the note? Okay. Well, apparently they didn't think so. He didn't think so post the homicide or post the discovery of the body. Okay. That's concerning to me. Because if I was in that circle and the first question, if it came up to be a conversation, the question I would have had, well, where's the other child? Well, the other child's asleep in the upstairs and was asleep upstairs in the bedroom. Okay. What's he wearing? What was he doing? Well, he was asleep. Okay. And now the father who says, yeah, I read him a story. Okay. Are we to suppose here that the father was only asked about her and what she's wearing? Okay. Because remember, the second call supposed to come in shortly there, in a short period of time. So red turtleneck, JonBenet and Burke's bedrooms are separate and are located on the second floor of the third-story house, with the master bedroom on the top floor. JonBenet's bedroom has an access door to a second floor porch, which was locked and undamaged. So he's checking locks and he's checking points of entry, POIs. And he's also, though, making a point to say, hey, the two kids are on the same floor. Which, if this was a kidnapping at the time, and he's investigating it as a kidnapping at the time because he said so, okay, then both of those children could have been targeted. And that means you ask the why question. Why was Burke spared? Because now you start looking through the victim risk continuum and you start saying to yourself, like, let's use Elizabeth Smart. Why was the younger sister spared and Elizabeth taken? It's the same principle. Why was Burke spared and JonBenet taken? At the time this report is flowing. Okay. As Mr. Ramsey made preliminary telephone calls to gather the demand amount of money, he told me that the only other people with keys to the house are their housekeepers. So somebody asked, who has access to this house? And if so, who has keys? So now this list of individuals starts to present itself. So they're going, okay, we may have a kidnapping here because she's missing. Burke's still here, so he's still a target, because if this individual's going around Boulder and taking kids out of their houses, okay, that child is in danger. Okay? And then he says, okay, so who has the keys to the house? Why do they have the keys to the house? And what kind of altercations have been taking place in the past? So the officer's doing his job here. Okay. The amount of money he told me that the other people, remember the $118,000, So the dad's working on allegedly this amount that needs to be collected. Okay. And 2 relatives in Atlanta told me that blank had spoken to her by telephone on the morning of the 24th and asked for a loan of $2,000. We learned later this is the housekeeper. The blank had called her again that day and seemed upset about the argument with her sister, and she made plans with Mrs. Ramsey to come by the Ramsey's house while they were out of town and pick up a check which Ramsey would leave for them. So there was an agreement to lend money to the housekeeper because the housekeeper, I guess, had some family issues and they were getting into it, the family issues between the housekeeper and her sister. And then Mrs. Ramsey said, we're leaving. You know we're leaving. Okay? I'll leave you a check. All right. So here's a question. All right. Why add this type of detail into the narrative almost immediately? Almost immediately. Okay. Well, everybody's, a lot of people have only been focusing on one area of discussion in this case for a very long time. They forgot this is the most important piece of evidence in this entire case. I will submit that to you. Okay. The note is important, no question about it. But this is the most important. All right. Every piece of rope, every piece of stick, every piece of why is this crucifix still there? Why is the child still dressed? What's going on here? Why is this important? We can get to the why of the note down the road, okay? i.e. step by step in an investigation. Okay? Because now we get into when blank Patrick Ramsey's mother was advised by telephone of the incident, she asked that the officers on scene be told of blank, often commenting of how beautiful JonBenet was. The mother went to a stranger and a person making what she thought, and women, you women out there on this live here, you're never wrong. I said that in church today too. And you aren't. You're never wrong. Okay. So mom had a freaky weirdness feeling about somebody that she wanted to make sure that the PD knew right from the get-go. Okay. Right from the get-go. Hey, make sure these guys and gals know about so-and-so, such and such. Okay. So mom is trying to solve this over the phone with her daughter. So her daughter is talking to Mrs. Ramsey, is talking to her mother, and her mother saying, yeah, but what about creepy guy? Remember that creepy guy, basically. Okay. Commenting on how beautiful JonBenet was and if Mrs. Ramsey was concerned about her being kidnapped. Mrs. Paws commented, our comments were relayed to me by a third party, somebody else, so it's hearsay. It would probably never come into court. These factors relating to blank were given to Detective Arndt, and she began to develop background information on this person. Mrs. Ramsey told me further that blank lived in Fort Lupton with her husband, okay, and a 12-year-old daughter. Hoffman also has 2 adult daughters in their 20s, blank, and she rents the house she lives in from her sister, okay, unknown name. So the mother is creating a suspect, a suspicion, and she's feeding it to the detectives or to the officer who feeds it to Detective Art. Now, that's whose picture is on the thumbnail. Okay. 2 other possible suspects. So now we have 2 more. So we got a total of now of potentially 3 right from the get-go of who could have done this kidnapping at the time in their minds. Okay. One was an ex-employee fired during the past summer and had threatened to bring down Access Graphics, Mr. Ramsey's business. His name is blank. Mr. Ramsey contacted his personnel department to gather information blank for the detectives. So it feels like the family is saying, well, here are possibilities. Here are possibilities. And the officers are picking up on that as, okay, information we need to run with. In fact, the lead detective here who's on the scene at that point, immediately starts to develop background information, line 2, on this person. So she goes to work. That detective is saying, okay, all right, let's get somebody on this. Let's start chasing this down. Okay. And so there, in my opinion, right away, there's not a whole bunch of suspicion on the family yet when the first responders are on the scene initially. Gut feelings, meaning this officer is reflecting back on what happened, what he smelt, what he felt, who he talked to, what he did, and now he's documenting it. Here's the problem. Again, he's writing this after her body is found. So that opens up all kinds of potential cans of worms. Okay. 2 other possible suspects were given by the Ramseys. One was an ex-employee, blah, blah, blah. I went over that. The second person mentioned, who lives in Louisville, it was a female. She was JonBenet's nanny up until 2 years ago and had a very close relationship with her. This relationship was the only reason blank was mentioned, as the Ramseys were trying to allow for all possibilities. Okay. Between times of consulting with the detectives and the family, so they were having conversations. The officer, the family, and the investigators on scene. I walked through the lower level of the house and the garage. So the officer took it upon himself to go look through the house again, looking for obvious evidence. Although somewhat messy due to the season, the residence did not look out of order. In the basement, I attempted to open the door leading to the area where JonBenet was ultimately found, but it was secured by a wooden latch above the door. Now, here's an interesting paragraph. In the middle of his report, after being told, hey, there was a body found. Here's how that call went. Hey, yeah, just let you know, you heard on the radio, yeah, a code black. Okay, well, what's a code black? Right here in Boulder, a code black means a fatality, okay, i.e. a deceased party. Right there, code black. Okay, let me blow that up for you. Right there, fatality, deceased party. So now this officer, it learns that there was a problem here, that all along this victim had been in that house all along. Now we're going to get to Detective Art's report here, but right now we know, okay, that officer number 1 is now facing, man, how am I going to write this? And here he tells us, I walked through the lower level of the house and the garage, looking for obvious evidence. Although somewhat messy due to the season, the residence did not look out of order. In the basement, I attempted to open the door leading to the area where JonBenet was ultimately found, but it was secured by a wooden latch above the door. So there's a latch above the door, and the door opened inward. So that, to me, doesn't make sense. Because if he would have just slid the latch, and the door opens inward, well, then he could have looked in the room. Okay. It's not like he's pulling it out, pulling the door open, and that latch would have prevented that from being pulled. Okay. All he had to do was reach up, slide the latch, push the door in, and look into the room. Okay. In the basement, I attempted to open the door leading to the area where JonBenet was ultimately found. And here he says, verse 17, I attempted to open the door. So he tried to open the door. It was secured by a wooden latch above the door. The door opened inward, and I was looking for access out of the house. Now, to me, that makes absolutely no sense. None. That a responding officer is looking at interior doors of a house, and that if it's an access outside of the house, to the outside of the house, well, maybe that door led to an access outside of the house. So you open the door and you look through that access. Okay? And the door opened inward, and I was looking for access out of the house. Remember, this is post-homicide discovery. Since the door could not have been used for that purpose, and it was latched closed, I did not open it. Here he says, I attempted to open the door. And here, line 20, he says, but I didn't open the door. I don't know what to say about that. But if I'm a betting man, if this case has ever solved, okay, $1,000 on the defense that day. It's not baffling. It's problematic. Okay, problematic for the PD, not for anybody else. So shortly after Detective Sergeant Whitson arrived at the house after 1000 hours, okay, so I was released from the scene and went to the PD to begin the original report. Just after 1300 hours, which is 1 p.m., now the police have been there since 6 a.m., and at 1 p.m., this officer hears radio traffic. So he's on his radio, and he's probably writing his original report. But now he hears a 911 call and the discovery of a code black body at the residence. So at 1 p.m., it goes over the radio. Hey, we have a body here. So the police had custody and control of that scene from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. in the afternoon. And everybody is up in arms about the Koberger case. What took so long for the girls to call? Can you imagine the police being in that house since 6 in the morning, and that the body is discovered around 1, approximately? Because that's when he hears about it. And what does he do? I return to the house. I return to 755 15th with Officer Morgan. So he takes somebody with him. So now it's a homicide scene, even further. And I spoke with blank, and he told me that JonBenet had been found in the basement by Mr. Ramsey while blank and Mr. Ramsey were looking through the house. Mr. Blank told me that he had opened the door to that area earlier in the morning and had not seen JonBenet's body inside. I secured the area around where Mr. Ramsey had laid the body and assisted in getting the family and friends out of the house to close the crime scene. And we wonder why this case had not been solved. Okay? We ask ourselves of going, hey, wait a minute. What in the world? Now, there's a couple of things going on here. And I'm not trying to be critical, but I'm going to be honest. This is a major screw up. Major screw up. Because he goes back into the crime scene, i.e., he brings everything from the department back to the crime scene. Okay? And what does he do? He secures the area around where the body is. Well, what the heck is going on here, over? The guy's at the station. He hears a radio call that says, hey, we found the body. Immediately they run out and they jump in the car, and he takes somebody with him. Says, come on, let's go back. Officer Morgan goes with him. And they go back to the house where the evidence people have already been taking photographs, throwing, fingerprint powder all over the place. And then he shows up and he comes in and he secures the crime scene after getting the family out at that point. I left the house for the second time at 03:45, which I think that's a typo. It should say 15:45 or 3:45 in the afternoon. And Officer Weiss and Shuck were securing the front and back respectively. So it wasn't till about 3:45, according to his report, that the front and back of the house was being secured. So if we do the math here, 6 a.m., the police are on scene. At 3:45, they're securing the totality of the scene, outside, and it sounds like just before that, the inside. That is a lot of room for a lot of mistakes. And that's why, again, I go back to this. Because as an investigator, and I'm looking at this through the lens of a cold case investigator, I know I have a lot of problems with the DA and with the defense if they got hold of this. Because they're going to say and do a lot more than I'm talking about here. And so that's a major screw up. So I go back to this, okay? And I ask myself, okay, how controlled is this situation with her? Okay. What do I have to know about her manner of death and the cause of death? And that's why this garrote is so important. Because the first half of this, you can't fix it. It's broken. It's 1,000% broken. I've had cases where officers have come in, for, hey, Mac, don't worry about it. They've told the team it's all good, tight case, blah, blah, tight, whatever. Okay. And you ask yourself, okay, sounds good. Appreciate it. Good work, everybody, right? Crime scene logs are up. Everything's tight. And then you go and you press the button play. Let's say it's a liquor store robbery. And you discover there's been like 56 people through the store. And then you go, wow, okay, we've got some problems. So now you end up sorting through, if there's blood evidence, who stepped in what, did the fire guys step in stuff, so you got to get photographs of everybody's boots, shoes or whatever, okay, in which, by the way, they did, okay, and the type of boot, it quite frankly, back in that day, was a police boot. I mean, it was the most popular boot that law enforcement and fire wore. Okay, the boot evidence that they'd taken. Okay, and they say, well, there's no shoe prints outside in the snow or anything to that effect. Well, okay, great, but the question is, what time was it, photographed? Because according to this, it's 3:45 in the afternoon. And snow could have melted. So you've got to keep that as an open mind, that that's a possibility, and that the boot evidence may be a red herring. You may not have anything. Okay? That's just a thought. It doesn't mean it's facts. It just means it's a possibility into the totality of the circumstances. And it's your responsibility as an investigator to sit back and say, okay, well, that may not be as strong as I think it is. Okay? And you go from there. Okay? And God will always fill in that blank, trust me. Like I've talked about in the Brandon Wilson case or Matthew Checky case, where there was so much, it was such a mess inside that bathroom, but on the side of the wall, I only had a small amount of transfer. So I really didn't have a whole bunch in that particular incident. Okay? But in his pocket, where he put the knife, we were able to turn that pocket inside out, and we had Matthew's DNA on his clothing inside his pocket. But you could not see anything on the exterior of this guy. And so this is the kind of stuff where you go, wow, what took so long? And here, Burke Ramsey was awakened by his father shortly after blank arrived, and he was taken to the blank residence as soon as he was dressed. So here the officer is saying, Burke was in bed, was awakened by his father, dressed, put into clothing, and he says, I did not speak to him other than to walk him to blank Mr. Blank's vehicle. He seemed confused and was crying. And Mr. Ramsey again told me that he had slept through the night. Okay. Now, that in of itself, when we go back to this, what little boy would do this to their sister multiple times, according to the autopsy? If I was the lead investigator that day, I would have taken Burke off the table for a second. Take it away. Okay? Because that weapon is, in my opinion, and Dr. Bricato's opinion, and others, many others, have come to say, well, wait a minute, that's a very sophisticated use of the type of weapon utilized for SA and for SA gratification. So now this officer says, CPCRs concerning collection of officer of blah, blah, blah. Preliminary indications of the abduction of JonBenet Ramsey from the residence give way upon the discovery of her body in the residence. So what he's saying here is this is not a kidnapping in any way, shape, or form. Okay. But rather it's a homicide investigation that's begun and continued by detectives with the reclassification of this incident to be forthcoming. So he adds this conclusion paragraph. Okay. He's got the narrative, evidence, conclusion. So his conclusion is, hey, guess what? It wasn't a kidnapping. It's a homicide. Okay. Well, how did they know it was a homicide? Because that's how she was found. And so now they have to ask, why is this the way it is? And so you take the note now and you push it way off to the side. Now, is it important? Of course the note is important. Okay. But is it the only piece of evidence that you grab and you hold on to? And the answer is no. An experienced investigator, which I would submit to you was lacking in this particular case, would have said, okay, where does the note fit into this? And how does it correlate with the garrote? How does that happen? Why do we have a note? And why do we have a garrote? And I'm going to get Steve Johnson on here. We talked about doing a show together on this, and we're going to break that note down. Okay? Because there are 4 experts. There are so many experts that have weighed in on that note. Some said yes, some said no, okay? Including the Secret Service that said, no, she did not write that. Now, does that exclude others in the circle? I don't know yet. But now you have, we're in 2024, and they knew right away that there was unknown male DNA in her undergarments. And so the question is, well, back then, how did you get that? How did they get that? Where did that come from? And what did they try to do? They went back to China looking for a white male at the factory, in the underwear factory, as a contributor to, this DNA possibility. And by the way, they eliminated everybody in the family, the father, the brother. Okay? They don't even have to eliminate the mother because it's a unknown male DNA. So the investigation can't go forward. The investigation was frozen that day. And any experienced investigator would have said, like Lou Schmidt, well, what's the results on the DNA? Who is hitting on this DNA? What do we have? Can we exclude the family? Well, it's not the fathers, okay, and it's not the brothers. Okay, you mean the kid that's getting dressed upstairs that was sound asleep from the first responding officer? Yeah, okay, well, that doesn't surprise us, does it? But now we go back to the weapon of choice, the garrote. And then we start thinking outside of the box. You have to think outside of the box at this point. Okay? And we think about, the underwear. Well, this was the underwear she was wearing. Okay. The ME's office took it off of her. And so, they collected it with her body. All that evidence went into, the bag, and the body snatchers, as we call them, and it all goes to the ME's office. So now let's go to Detective Ardent here. I can't even pronounce her name. This is her report. Now, we seeing the first one, the officer says, well, I didn't check the door, but then he learns, somebody checked the door, and actually, I kind of checked the door. So he's kind of 50-50 here, all right? Post the discovery of the body. Now, her background is she is a juvenile detective. She deals with SA, she deals with kids. And because this is a child, a missing child, i.e. kidnapping, she gets called. She gets called out. She's not working child homicides, because usually you have, people that do that. And this agency at the time did not have a full-blown homicide unit, people that do that all day. So she gets called in, as well as they take a guy from narcotics who's a sharp dude in putting together narcotics cases, okay? And they say, okay, well, you're a smart guy. You can probably, put some of these packets together here and have them make sense. Okay. Remember, guys and gals, the word DLR, or the acronym DLR, right? Well, if those of you who are just joining us on this channel, DLR means does not look right. DLR is the kind of concept where you go, you know what, i.e. Moscow PD picks up a black jacket that the victim, also had a black jacket the night before outside in the grass, and they pick it up on national TV, look at it, and then they drop it and they walk away. Okay. DLR is when you walk up, on Thanksgiving Day and you look behind a trash can, you see a glove sitting there and you go, well, that doesn't look right. And you tell the cops, hey, come on over here and collect this. And they just kind of like, okay, yeah, sure, click, click. They take some pictures, and I'm assuming they collected it because Karen and I walked up the street at that point. I didn't sit there and say, hey, by the way, I was, a homicide investigator, still working for the Cold Case Foundation. And by the way, I've done a couple of these and that doesn't look right. Instead, you get this, well, yeah, whatever. Okay. Well, a lot of what I'm going to read here is DLR. And what happens in that is you're going to see a very clear picture of investigating the person, not the information presented. Okay? You always follow information. Where does that information take you? Okay? Where does this information take us? Does it take us to a note? Okay? You see, that's secondary, noise. That's secondary noise. But the information that we have here is somebody knew what they were doing. Somebody knew how to do it. And so now we have to apply that into, well, who's in the environment? What are the circles here? Did this house have access? Were there access points for people to come in, i.e. parties? Were there people that could, come into this house, i.e. Elizabeth Smart, the sister going, I know who it was. It was the handyman. Low risk environment, situation, circumstance, low, medium, high. Everything in this case was way over to the far left in the victim risk continuum. That is a low risk victim in a low risk circumstance. And that tells us somebody had access to that house that knew something about that house and in that house. Now, who that is, I don't know yet personally. Okay? But it also means it could not be who initially comes to the top of suspect list right away. It could be somebody totally irrelevant, but had access into the house. And that's why, who had access to a key? Those kind of questions became paramount early on. Okay, well, how did the person get in? Those are the huge questions. Okay. And the officer said he went down and he examined the basement, but he didn't see the broken windows that everybody else saw in the photographs. Okay. So there was tunnel vision. There's a tunnel vision going on here. And it's not because the officer was a bad guy or did something. No, he was probably inexperienced, young. Okay. And all of a sudden, he's faced with a very huge circumstance here. Okay. It's a very huge circumstance. All right. So let's go over the detective's response here. On December 26th at 1996 at approximately 06:35. So she gets a phone call at 6:35 in the morning. Okay. I receive a phone call at my home number from Detective Sergeant Whitson. Sergeant Whitson informed me that officers were on the scene of a reported kidnapping. So she's being told, hey, we've got a kidnapping. So let's connect those dots. The officer at the scene is not thinking in any way, shape, or form, okay, that the child is dead at this point. They're operating under the guise of a kidnapping. The reported kidnapping had occurred at 755 15th Street, located in Boulder County, Colorado. JonBenet Ramsey, a 6-year-old female, and by the way, this is also being written post discovery of the homicide. Okay. JonBenet Ramsey, a 6-year-old female, was reported to have been kidnapped from her home. JonBenet's mother had found a ransom letter inside the home at approximately 0550. Now, it's interesting. There is no discrepancy there. That this morning, JonBenet had been last seen inside her home at 2200. No discrepancy. There was no apparent forced entry to the residence. Other family members who were inside the home from the night of December 25th through the morning of December 26th had not been harmed, i.e. Burke. These family members included JonBenet's mother, father, and brother. So she's laying out, is this a targeted event? In the note left by the reported kidnappers, the author of the note stated the reported kidnappers would phone the Ramseys between 8 and 10 o'clock in the morning. Now, that's interesting because she gets the call at 6:30, and she knows that there is a time frame from the note that says between 8 and 10, there's going to be a phone call. So she needs to hustle. Okay. So she's got an hour and 20 minutes to get to the house. Sergeant Whitson requested I respond to the Ramsey residence on 15th Street, i.e. get over here. Sergeant Whitson was going to make attempts to have U.S. West Communications place a trap on all incoming calls placed to the Ramsey home. A trap, as we all know, back even today, you can still do it. You call the phone company and you say, hey, this is Detective so-and-so, such and such. I have an emergency extra circumstances. I have a kidnapping of a small child out of her home. The suspect left a note. And in that note, the suspect says he's going to call between 8 and 10. Under exigent circumstances, can you please put a trap up onto the phone for any inbound and outbound phone calls? And I will get you a search warrant as soon as I can. We're working the case now. 99% of all phone companies and telecommunication groups will say no problem. Well, hit up our security groups later on when you have an opportunity. Trap is on, and it's literally just flipping a couple of switch. Okay, I went to the Boulder Police Department, and now this is again DLR. I went to the Boulder Police Department and obtained a handheld tape recorder as well as my notebook. So that tells me a lot about personality. It tells me, one, she doesn't have a tape recorder and she doesn't have her notebook in her car or with her as an investigator. as a detective. Just saying. I met with Detective Fred Patterson at the Boulder PD, i.e., hey, you've got an hour and 20 minutes. Let's all go, and I'll meet you at the PD. Okay? Detective Patterson and I responded to the Ramsey address located on 15th Street. But then she goes back to the PD. While at the PD, I briefly met with Officer Vitek. Officer Vitek informed me that he had the ransom note, which had been left by the reported kidnappers. So she goes to the PD, runs in this officer who had bagged the note, and is back. He's back at the police department, and he goes, hey, detective, I've got the note. This was, and she says, I requested that Vitek make 3 copies of this note, i.e. contaminated. That's what that means. Okay. Oh, you've got the note? Yeah. Okay. Make 3 copies of it, would you? Okay. What do you mean? Yeah. Make 3 copies of the note for me. You don't want me to, secure this thing? Well, you just take it. I don't know how it worked, but they made 3 copies of it. This request was carried out. I retained possession of 1 of the copies of the note. Another copy was given to Patterson, and the 3rd copy was placed in a sealed envelope and left on my desk. All right. So before she even gets to the scene, the note is in play. Right away, the note is in play in this investigator's mind. Okay? Not this, but that note 100% is in play. Okay? And now at the time, giving credit where credit is due, they believed that they were dealing with a kidnapping, okay, initially. The body hadn't been found yet, okay? But they're 100% going to focus on this note right away, right from the get-go. Detective Patterson and I then responded to the Ramsey residence. Prior to arriving at the residence, we met with the watch commander, who was probably the 3rd shift, Sergeant Paul Rickenbacher. We met with Rickenbacher at the rear of the Base Mar Shopping Center at approximately 07:55. So 5 minutes before the suspects are supposed to call in the note, they're meeting behind a shopping center. I wonder what they're talking about. Sergeant Ruggen personally provided us with the following additional information. Officers had been dispatched to the call. All further communication was done by telephone rather than radio traffic. The first officer on the scene was Officer French, whose report we just read, and French had told Ruggen that something didn't seem right. The 6-year-old daughter of John Ramsey, JonBenet Ramsey, had been kidnapped from her bedroom sometime between 2200, 10 o'clock at night on December 6th and 6 o'clock in the morning. That's 8 hours. A 2.5-page note had been found at by JonBenet's mother. Demands in this note stated that $118,000 be paid to ensure the safe return of JonBenet. No police or law enforcement were to be notified, otherwise JonBenet would be decapitated. The 2.5-page note had been found by JonBenet's mother at the bottom of a spiral staircase located in the house. JonBenet, or John Ramsey, is the president of Access Graphics. This business is located, blah, blah, blah. This business is very successful. All right, so that debrief right away says, hey, before you get there, okay, before you even get there, French says something doesn't feel right. Okay, like what? Well, the mom found the note. That mom finds this note in the house, and the child's going to be decapitated, and it's just, and the note is wacky. There's no question about it. Right? But they're 5 minutes away from a deadline in the note. The deadline is 8 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock in the morning. That's like a huge wall, okay, coming at you. And, hey, guess what? Right. While you're behind the shopping center, the guy called. Okay. And who answered the phone by chance? Okay. Hypothetical. So the sergeant says, hey, there was a light dust of snow on the ground when he arrived at the residence, and he did not notice any footprints or other tracks in the snow. So he personally checked the exterior of the Ramsey residence. He did not notice any signs of forced entry to the residence. Okay. He had arranged through Boulder Regional Communications Center, BRCC, dispatch, to have a trap placed on the Ramsey phone number and the number of John Ramsey residence 303. So they got a trap on the number, okay? And they're out behind the shopping center talking about there's nothing unusual, in the snow. I didn't see any forced entry. And by the way, you guys got less than 3 minutes now, 2 minutes. The trap was activated in the place of the time Detective Patterson arrived at the Ramsey residence. You notice she doesn't put the time in here initially? Sergeant Rockham informed me that the U.S. West communication, a letter of demand, blah, 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 48 hours explaining the necessity of the trap. Okay, now we get here. She's on the scene, 10 minutes late. This tardiness, in my opinion, is unacceptable. When you have this note that says between 8 and 10, I'm going to call, and you show up at 8:10, okay, that is just telling me, okay, that there's not a whole lot of concern here going on, and that they're not believing in any way, shape, or form that there could be anything else discovered later on. So this is a lack of experience. This is an apathy that's taking place, because the last thing you want in your community is if you call the police and they show up at your house and they find this note, and the note says, I will call you between 8 and 10, and they show up at 8:10, not 8 and 10, between 8 and 10. Okay. For me, that has always bothered me. And up here, there was a request for a canine officer was notified his service may be needed and was placed on standby. Okay. So they didn't feel that they were going to bring any dogs in right away. Okay. They were looking for dogs, but they put them on standby. Okay. And so she shows up at 8:10, and then she meets with Officer French. French provides me with a synopsis of who was on the scene and what had already been done. 8:10 in the morning. Crime scene investigators, Officer Barry, blah, 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 at the Ramsey residence. Officer Weiss was photographing the interior and exterior of the residence. Now, remember, in this note, it says, don't call the cops. Okay? But the family called the cops. So that was a risk. You put that in the risk column to JonBenet, if that note was real. Because if this was an organized group and they were watching the house, because in the note, it has both plural and singular, concepts. What if they were watching the house? And what was the punishment for calling the police in this note? Well, the punishment was clear. The child would be decapitated. So they had to be, I get the impression they weren't operating under this assumption right from the get-go that there could be any other possibilities than this note is bogus. And there's something more going on here. Okay. And as a result of that, you now have to say, okay, well, if that's where they're operating from, then why aren't they taking more precautions in shutting that scene down? Because if it turns out, which it did, that that child was dead inside that house, well, then why aren't they taking the steps towards that if that's where they're headed in their thought process? As an investigative team, they should have immediately said, you know what? This note doesn't DLR. It's DLR. Doesn't look right. Okay. All right. What are our other possibilities? Maybe she's in the house. Maybe she's dead. Maybe she's in the backyard. I don't know. Let's shut it down. Close it. Close the environment. Everybody out. Nobody do anything, right? Boom. Common sense. Well, common investigative sense and experience level sense. Okay. So here she meets with the Officer French and he tells her, well, who's in the house and what are they doing? Well, they're trying to get fingerprints. Areas included possible points of exit and entry to the residence, as well as the spiral staircase leading from outside JonBenet's room to the first floor and the door leading into JonBenet's room. Again, they're focusing only on one possibility. Officer French provided me with the following information. Now they're focusing on one possibility, but they're thinking a second possibility, i.e., this note is not lining up and the rest of this, it's just not coming to town for us, up here. Officer French told me that when he arrived, he met with Patsy, JonBenet's mother. Patsy was very upset and distraught, and it was difficult for Officer French to obtain information from her. Officer French also spoke with JonBenet Ramsey's father. Officer French learned the Ramsey family had been at a friend's house on the late afternoon and evening of December 25th, Christmas Day. They returned home at 2200. That has been a consistency. Okay? Consistency. JonBenet and her brother Burke went to bed shortly after the family returned home. John Ramsey had read to JonBenet after she's gone to bed. This is French telling Ardant. And before she went to sleep. JonBenet had last been seen wearing a red turtleneck and white long underwear. That's from the father to the officer. He's got a 50% right there. Patsy woke up this morning and discovered the suspect ransom note at the bottom of the spiral staircase. Patsy originally thought that the note may have been left by the housekeeper, her first impression. Officer French had been told that the Ramsey family had been planning to leave early this morning from Michigan, which was all true. Okay? That was all consistent. It was true. Okay? After Patsy discovered the note, she went to JonBenet's bedroom. Patsy discovered JonBenet was missing. Officer French told me there was no apparent forced entry to the Ramsey home. Officer French had checked the Ramsey home and had not detected any signs of JonBenet. 4 friends of the Ramsey had been notified by the Ramseys of JonBenet's disappearance and were currently at the house. The pastor for Ramsey's church had also been notified and was also present at the house. You have 5 people contaminating that crime scene. and the victims and the police department's victim advocates, plural. That's at least 7, have been notified and were present inside the Ramsey home. So you had 7 people in that house, and you're 10 minutes late to the call coming in. Okay? But already you have 7 people in that house, okay, that aren't supposed to be in that house at the abduction of a child out of a house. Okay. After I brief, and by the way, these are the kind of things that law enforcement agencies have to admit, because they go after the conclusion of this kind of stuff and they say, you know what could we have done better? And you know what I've not heard in all of these years? I've not heard the investigators say, you know what, I screwed up. You know who I have heard say it? Officer French, the first responding officer. But like you, I don't know if I've ever heard some of these other individuals. In fact, they sued the department. Okay? You have to be honest with yourself and say, okay, we made mistakes, because that way you can fit those mistakes in the information that is discovered down the road, i.e. fingerprints, boot prints, cross-contamination, hairs, fibers, all this other stuff that comes with, being at the station, hearing a call, hey, that we found a body, and then rushing back to the house with another officer, okay, which is a no-no, and then going in and securing the body and escorting everybody out of the house at that point at 3:45 in the afternoon. They've had control of that house since 6 a.m. And let's remind everybody, 3:45 is when he said it was finally shut down. But in the interim, you have all these people in that house. And here's why that's becoming significant here. Because you have this detective who is saying something doesn't look right here. Instead of saying, well, what would have happened if these 7 people weren't in the house? What would I have observed? What would I have found? Instead, she is projecting her thoughts, feelings, and emotions as, you know what? That doesn't look right. He was over there grabbing his mail. That didn't look right. That didn't look right. That didn't look right. Well, guess what? What didn't look right is you didn't have that scene secured. That's a huge problem. And if this case is ever solved, the defense is going to have a field day with that problem. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. So John Ramsey gave me his verbal, I told Mr. Ramsey that I would also like to connect a tape recorder. Wait, let me get back here. After I had briefed with Officer French, I met with John Ramsey. I informed John Ramsey that the U.S. West Communications had already placed a trap on an incoming phone call made to his home. So I told Mr. Ramsey that I would also like to connect a tape recorder to the incoming line. Now, this is interesting because the phone company tells them, hey, we got an incoming call. And she's like, oh, I should connect a tape recorder to it. Afterthought. Trap on the incoming phone calls. I told Mr. Ramsey I'd also like to connect a tape recorder to the incoming phone line. John Ramsey gave me his verbal permission. I asked John Ramsey for the location of the phones in the house on the first floor. John Ramsey showed me a telephone mounted on the wall at the west end of the kitchen and a telephone located in the den. The den is located west of the kitchen. I connected the tape recorder to the telephone located in the den. I informed Mr. Ramsey that if the author of the suspected ransom note called, we would be able to tape record the conversation. John Ramsey was informed of my actions and gave his verbal consent. Yeah, great. Let's make it happen. After the phone recorded had been connected to the telephone in the den, I instructed John Ramsey on the use of the tape recorder. John Ramsey told me that he would answer the phone for all incoming calls. After the tape recorder had been connected to the telephone, I met with Patsy. Patsy was sitting on a chair in the sitting room. This room is located at the southeast corner of the house on the first floor. 2 of Patsy's friends were with her. So everybody is in different places. Okay. Two of Patsy's friends were with her. And Patsy spoke softly when she talked to me at times. At times, Patsy seemed to be staring off into the distance. Patsy seemed to have a vacant look and seemed dazed. So this is probably within 20 minutes of being in the house, and this is her first impression of the mother. Okay. A mother whose daughter is missing, and she's in the house, and she's, let's give her the benefit of the doubt for a second. She has no idea, maybe, that this is coming. Okay? But the officer's making observations here of behavioral observance. Okay? She's sitting in her room, and she has a vacant look on her face, and she seems dazed. Does that jump out at anybody that, and with her 2 friends there, that who she called and says, JonBenet's missing, who's been doting over this child, because she has been suffering from cancer, ovarian cancer survivor, and she's been doting over this child, and back then, these pageants and stuff, which was not unusual, okay? Because if we think about it, there were thousands of moms doing that with their children. It's not something that you just go, well, that's weird. Well, no, at the time it wasn't weird. It was something that they were doing, okay? And if you look at the picture on the thumbnail, you'll know why I put that picture there now, okay? She looks dazed in that picture. Since Patsy was situated in a room some distance from the den, I had limited contact with her. I asked Officer French to remain with Patsy. I did ask Patsy a few questions and was able to receive some information. The following is information that I received from Patsy. She got up in the morning at December 26th and had gone down the stairs from her bedroom to the kitchen. Patsy used the back, i.e. west stairway. The back stairway consists of a spiral staircase leading from just outside JonBenet's bedroom to the northwest corner of the first floor of the house. At the bottom of the spiral staircase, Patsy discovered a 3-page handwritten note. The note had been written on a legal pad-sized paper. Patsy said she originally thought the note might have been left by her housekeeper. After Patsy looked at the note and read it, she ran to JonBenet's bedroom. JonBenet was missing. I asked Patsy who had keys to her house. Patsy said the woman who was responsible for housekeeping at her home had a key to the home. I asked Patsy if the home had an alarm system and if the alarm system had been activated on the night of December 25th. Patsy told me that the home does have an alarm system. However, it had not been used in a while. Patsy did tell me that she believed the house had been locked when she and the rest of her family went to bed on the night of the 25th. She said she had not received any suspicious phone calls nor hang-up calls in the past few weeks. Okay. Now, a follow-up question to that would have been, well, had you received calls in a few weeks? And she didn't put there. There had been no unwelcome solicitors nor suspicious persons at the Ramsey home in the past few weeks. Okay. Well, let's get a list of people that had been here at the time. Okay. Patsy said that she, her husband, JonBenet, and Burke, her 10-year-old son, had planned on leaving Boulder on the morning of December 26. The family was going to fly to Michigan to spend time at their summer home. I asked Patsy who knew about this trip. Patsy said some of her close friends knew and the housekeeper knew. Patsy had not arranged for the neighbors or anyone else to watch their home while the Ramsey's family was in Michigan. I asked Patsy if she could think of anyone who might be responsible for JonBenet's disappearance. Patsy told me that her housekeeper had asked to borrow money on the 24th. Patsy told me that she had a Christmas party at her home on the 23rd and was supposed to be clean up was supposed to clean up from the party at the morning of the 24th. Linda Hoffman had phoned Patsy on the morning of the 24th. Linda Hoffman asked Patsy if she could borrow some money. So here they redact it and then they put her name in here. Patsy had said yes. Patsy told me, had said she loaned the money to blank in the past, phoned Patsy again on the afternoon of the 24th, and she was crying. She said she needed to borrow $2,000. Patsy thought the money was needed for dental repair for somebody in her family. Patsy told me she would write a check for $2,000 and she would leave it on the check on the kitchen counter. And Patsy told me that blank was scheduled to be at the Ramsey home on the morning of December 25th or 27th at 0900. Now that's interesting because that's a lot of information being put out here. So the detective is saying, okay, well, who do you think could have done this? And immediately she's saying, well, the only person that comes to mind is somebody that was asking me, for money. Okay. And it's my housekeeper. She has access to the house. She needed money. And I think she's very suspicious. However, I also need to tell you about the party that we had here a couple of days ago. Now, who had access to that house at that time were a lot of people. It was obvious. Okay? It's obvious. Okay? But so the question then, from an investigative analysis point, comes, okay, well, who in that access point, i.e., come to the house, has knowledge like this, and who in the family circle environment has knowledge like this? Because this is SA. Okay? This device was utilized according to the autopsy report, and you guys should go watch the last show that we did on JonBenet. The ME says that device was utilized 4 separate times. Now, anybody that knows anything about certain cases like this, and my expertise is this type of situation. That's why I got called back in 1997. And the first thing I asked Lou, and Lou and I had a long conversation about the weapon. What was the weapon utilized? Okay. And at that time, okay, remember, there's unknown male DNA. Even back then, okay, when DNA was really just kicking off, late 80s, early 90s, and everybody was going, what's DNA? Okay. The authorities knew at that time that the family, i.e. the father and the brother, because it's male DNA, had been off the table, had been eliminated. And Lou told me that, okay, that, look, it's not matching anybody in the family. So then the second question was, okay, well then, who has, knowledge like this? And if so, what's going on here in relationship to that? Okay. That's kind of like the note is big. Yes, no question about it. The note's big. Okay? But the garrote is bigger. Okay. So you have to work your way down. Okay. And if you solve this piece of the puzzle, because think of it like a giant, pretzel, or excuse me, a potato chip crushed on the table. Okay. But then over here, you have a pretzel. Okay. And the pretzel just kind of like, well, that's weird. Okay. I.e. the note. Okay. But I have this potato chip here, and it all looks, like I got to put the potato chip together first before I can figure out why the pretzel's on the table. And in this case, I would submit to you, there is a reversal taking place here. Okay? That the note becomes so significant, okay, that they get tunnel vision. And then you add on some of the other situations that have been taking place, and that this instrument here then, doesn't come to the surface until later on in the investigation. But by then, there are so many decisions being made that they dismiss it. And when they finally do, okay, when they finally start looking at it and they go, okay, well, we've got this big problem, i.e. the murder weapon, and how it was utilized, why is her hair caught up in it? And, and then there's other, marks on her body where people are going, well, it could be a taser, it could be a piece of the train track. And you can go down those lanes for weeks and months and 30 years. You can run down that lane. But the red herring has been, well, by the way, we have this unknown male DNA, and we have this potato chip that's all crushed here on the table. So are they correlated? Do they connect? Okay. Instead of, you got to think about it as like a doctor. If you go into a doctor's office and he says, okay, chemotherapy, 3 weeks, and that's the first thing he says, and you go, for what? I don't know. You got chemotherapy. We got it coming. Okay. Instead of the reverse, Mr. McDonough, you have cancer. Okay. You're going to go A, B, C, or D, radiation for this amount of weeks, or whatever the deal's going to be. Boom. Here's your diagnosis. Here is your prescription. And I think in this case, they prescribed before they diagnosed. Okay. And the public bit into it and took off. Okay. I mean, we're still taking off on it. But right in front of us is the conversations that were taking place. These are what the officers were doing. So you stay here. You stay here. Okay. Just like and I'm going to say this, just like in the Sebastian Rogers case. Okay. Don't leave the house. Don't leave the house yet. All the other stuff, the other pretzels coming into the environments, okay, like Summer Wells, don't leave the house until you can sort through and pull out all the pieces of the potato chip and say, okay, I have a potato chip. Now let's look over here at the pretzel. How did the pretzel get into the bag with the potato chip? How did that happen? Why is it there? Okay, why is it there? And here we go into this conversation even further where she said, Patsy further told me Mrs. Blank, adult children, have had problems in the past 2 months. So this is a curveball, okay, that she's producing here. Okay. Patsy believed that one of Blank's adult daughters had been in contact with the safe house because of domestic violence problems. Okay. Well, do domestic violence problems get to this? No, they don't make sense, do they? They don't make sense. Okay. Patsy did not know the name of the daughter, nor would she where she lived. Patsy thought the daughter lived and thought the daughter's domestic problems might have occurred prior to Thanksgiving of 1996. So essentially now you have this idea that you can say, is she trying to throw us off track here, or, what's going on? But remember, they haven't found the body yet. Okay. So she's just presenting this information based upon being asked questions. Okay. So the investigators then are going to say, okay, well, let's check all this out. And guess what? That's exactly what French said she started to do. She believed what Patsy was telling her. Or else, why check it out? Why put the investigative resources into a situation that you already know could be bogus? No. She was going to make sure that she was crossing the T's and dotting the I's. That part, I give her 100% credit. Because here, she goes, after I spoke briefly with Patsy, I returned to the den area of the house. Each time the telephone rang, I was present when John Ramsey answered the phone. Okay? So we know at least 3 times, or at least sometimes she was there and sometimes she wasn't. There were at least 3 times when John Ramsey was not present in the den when the phone rang. Now, again, let's go to the 8 to 10 of why that was so important. Those are the deadlines from this note that they were operating under. And the cops, i.e. this detective, shows up at 8:10 in the morning. So she's already 10 minutes late. And rather than controlling the situation, okay, i.e. one person, Mr. Ramsey, yeah, I need to ask you a favor. What is that? Okay, we need to clear this house. We need to get everybody out of here because there could be evidence in here of this intruder, okay? And we've got too many people in here. Everybody out. Let's go. Chop, chop. Okay? But instead, it sounds like she's sitting there with a remote control watching TV with everybody else and observing, okay? Well, no, her job is between 8 and 10 in the morning and that phone. That's their job, okay? That's your job. You focus on that phone, those calls allegedly coming in, and she notes 3 of them where she blamed Ramsey for being out of the room. But she doesn't blame herself by saying, I didn't have Mr. Ramsey sitting by the phone in case it rang for 2 hours. That is a small sacrifice for a daughter who this alleged note said, we're going to decapitate her. Okay. You would think that that level of, expectation would be a lot higher there. But instead, she says, I personally saw John Ramsey run to the den to answer the phone. For each incoming phone call received at the Ramsey home on the morning of December 26th, John Ramsey told me that the caller was not associated with the suspect ransom note. What she's describing here is an excited anticipation from the father to get on this phone call. She's describing him running to get to the phone, picking it up, and going, hello, I would love to hear those calls. But what does she do? She uses it against him. While I was in the den, the pastor from Blank Church relayed a message to me. Patsy had told this information to the pastor. I believe the pastor's first name blank. The pastor told me about a telephone conversation Patsy had with her mother. Patsy's mother had spoken with the housekeeper. Well, Patsy's mother had been living in the Ramsey home. Blank had reportedly said that JonBenet was so cute that someone would kidnap her. Okay, so now this is the result of having multiple people in the house. Okay, so now you have hearsay. You have the mother talking to her mother, Patsy talking to her mom, and a pastor listening. And then at the conclusion of the call, Patsy says to the pastor, my mom told me that, JonBenet was so cute that she could be kidnapped. Okay. And the pastor then going to the detective and saying, hey, I need to tell you something. What's up? Patsy said that her mother said JonBenet was so cute that JonBenet's grandmother thinks that she could have been kidnapped. Okay? You see, and that's why all of this mishigosh starts to get, craziness. Instead of just doing the right thing, turn the key off, get out of the car, wait over there. We'll be right there. Well, Patsy's mother had been living in the Ramsey home. And this was a past conversation that he's going to reflect here. Had reported that JonBenet was so cute that someone kidnapped her. I met with Patsy and asked her about her telephone conversation with her mother. Hey, I understand you had a conversation with your mother. Patsy told me that she had spoken to her mother after she had discovered JonBenet was missing. Patsy's mother is blah, 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 and she lives in Atlanta. And Blank had told Patsy that Mrs. Blank had said many times that JonBenet was such a beautiful girl and wasn't Blank afraid that someone was going to kidnap her. Patsy supplied me with Blank's home phone number. This phone number is Detective Patterson was going to follow up on the information regarding Mrs. Blank and her family. Detective Patterson was going to attempt to have U.S. West Communications place a trace on Blank's home phone number. You see, they're going all kinds of directions without realizing that they're waiting for this phone call allegedly to be coming in here. Okay. This is just craziness. What's going on in that house that morning? Within about the first 20 minutes of arriving at the Ramsey residence, I asked John Ramsey if he would consent to having his office telephones having a trap on them. John Ramsey did give his verbal authorization. He supplied me with his work phone numbers for himself as well as his first assistant. These phone numbers were blank, respectively, blah, blah, blah. There were 2 cellular phones at the Ramsey house when Detective Patterson and I arrived. These cell phones were used to make phone calls from the Ramsey residence. The telephone at the Ramsey house was not used to make outgoing phone calls on the morning of December 26. The cell phones belonged to John Ramsey and Blank, the friends who had been contacted by the Ramseys and who were present with the Ramseys when I arrived. Now, why she's bringing these other cell phones into the conversation, I'm still a little confused on that. Because what she's saying here is, when I got there, I asked Mr. Ramsey if I could plug, a trap on his work phones. And, oh, by the way, I need to tell you about these 2 cell phones that were also there that they were making outbound phone calls on. Okay. And so is this an excuse that they didn't put a trap on the cell phone? Is that, I don't know, is that what she's trying to write here? I'm still a little confused on that personally. The cell phones belong to John Ramsey, blah, blah, blah. Burke, the Ramsey's 9-year-old son, had already left the residence when I arrived. Burke was staying at Blank, located at Blank in Boulder. After I connected the tape recorder to the telephone, we're back at the tape recorder, and had briefly met with Patsy. I talked with John Ramsey in the den. Now, you notice she keeps going right back to John Ramsey. Okay? I talked with John Ramsey about things to say when the authors of the suspected ransom note called. I told John that he should demand to talk to JonBenet. If John Ramsey was going to be given instructions for meeting the purported kidnappers, I instructed John Ramsey to obtain very specific instructions from the caller. John Ramsey was told to say that he would not be able to obtain the money until at least 1700 or 5 o'clock on this date. I supplied John Ramsey with a piece of notebook paper, I had John Ramsey write notes on this piece of paper regarding what to say when the authors of the suspected ransom note phoned. Now, in a situation like this, the investigator writes the questions. Okay, Mr. Ramsey, yeah, here's the narrative. Okay. And the investigator, during a situation like this, holds the note up. Okay. Make sure and usually the caller goes like that or something to that effect. You don't hand them the note and say, okay, no, take notes, write down what you're going to say, what I'm going to tell you you're going to say. Okay. There is a lack of control here, a lack of control in this investigation. And that's just a small piece. Okay. There is just a total, we're over our head here. Okay. This is like the 5 cars that are out in front of 1122 King Street, and nobody has impounded them yet. They just sit there for days. Okay. And even though there's yellow tape up, there's wind, rain, snow, all kinds of, for all we know, if Brian Koberger's the guy, he walked out, took a glove off and tapped one of the cars, and you have his fingerprints on that car. But they just sat there for days. Okay. Correct protocol would have been, what do we got? We got 5 cars outside. Let's get them impounded right now. Let's get them into a safe place. Okay. It's a mess. This is a mess. Okay. The purported kidnappers, this is, by the way, purported kidnappers. She's writing this and she's not believing it. And remember, she writes this on the 8th. I instructed John, she had already made up her mind who the perpetrators are here in this line right here. For meeting the purported kidnappers. I instructed John Ramsey to obtain specific instructions, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I had John Ramsey write notes on the piece of paper regarding what to say when the authors of the suspected ransom note phoned. I retained this notebook paper and later placed it in evidence item for Lincoln King Adam. The third item written by John Ramsey was must talk to JB. I had placed an asterisk by this sentence. Blank, a friend of John Ramsey, told John Ramsey that he would be able to obtain the ransom amount from his bank. The father is cooperating with the police at this point. He is he wants to answer the phone. He's allowed everything to happen at his work. He is saying, okay, I need to get the ransom amount money. Okay. And he's also saying that whatever you want me to do, whatever you want me to say, however you want me to say it, I'll do it. Okay. Now, that goes in the plus columns for him. Because he's working with the investigators through this. Okay, he's working with the investigators through this. At any time, anybody could have come walking up those stairs with that body outside of him during this. Think about that. They've had the house since 6 o'clock in the morning. Investigators are going through this whole house, including evidence techs. Any one of those evidence techs could have found JonBenet in that basement. The fact that the father found the child, okay, again, goes to, well, why did he find the child? Here's what I've always asked. Why didn't the cops find the child? Why didn't the evidence techs find the child? Why didn't she find the child? I'll tell you why, because they were focused on a phone call coming in based on that note. Now, let's just change those dynamics a minutiae second. The evidence tech discovers JonBenet and comes running upstairs and pulls this detective aside and says, she's in the basement. What do you mean she's in the basement? We have a homicide. Now, do you think at that point the dynamics of this case could have changed rapidly? I would submit to you the dynamics of this case and the facts of this case would have been 1,000% different. And that the note would have, quite frankly, a lot more significance than it does, other than it doesn't look right. But more importantly, on top of that, this would have been first and foremost instead of the note. Now, we don't think like that sometimes because we're only focused on how it happened. Okay. But you have the cops controlling that scene from 6 o'clock in the morning. And it wasn't until 1 p.m. that this radio call comes out, says, hey, we have the body. And who has the body? The father has the body. And the friend has the body. What if the friend would have discovered the body? Was he the suspect? What if, the pastor discovered the body? Was he the suspect? You see, and so you have to take the potato chip and assemble it, and at some point, that pretzel will be important. But here, the reverse happened. Okay, this scene was so that, i.e., the investigators, and I'm not trying to be too critical, but I'm going to be honest with you. Okay, when you look at this and you really sat back and you say, well, what the heck happened here? Well, no wonder Lou Schmidt came in and said, you guys have messed this up so bad, you didn't even have an open mind to another theory. And it caused so much contention that today they're still fighting over it. They're still fighting over it. When in reality, it's right in front of us. He's trying to get $118,000, the father. This amount was available, blank, 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 okay? Told me he was able to get the money. I.e., he tells the detective, hey, I can get the money, okay? Now, what happens if somebody walks up the stairs and says, hey, Arnett, yeah. What is it? The child's in the basement. At that point, again, we go back to, if there was only one guy in the house and it was the father, that's when you look at him and you gauge his reaction. That's when they could have, mom's in a daze, and this and that, okay? Well, mom shouldn't have been even in that house at that point. She should have been across the street at the girlfriend's house or wherever they had somebody in a very safe place. They should have gotten them out of that house. The pastor, they could have gone to the church. They could have hung out. Everybody could have been down there. You send an officer with them. He or she stays with them. That's your job. Guard all these people. That's what you're doing. Okay. You have Mr. Ramsey at the house, phone calls coming in. And, for these guys, they were out investigating, the house. They were already taking fingerprints, but nobody walks into that room other than the father. Okay. Well, that was actually the police's job. I hate to say it. That was their responsibility. Okay. To check every nook and cranny in that home. There's no excuses for that, in my opinion. Just my opinion. Especially when you have evidence people there. What were they doing? What kind of evidence were they looking for? And why didn't they go deeper into that case? And what's the argument for that? Well, the perpetrator must have known the layout of the house. Why? The officer French, the first guy on the scene, he walked into, allegedly looked into that room, according to his report, or according to, others' reports. So does that mean that it's a stranger that couldn't have found that room like the officer did? He walked to the door and he said in his report, well, I didn't, had a wooden latch on it, so I wouldn't go through it. So I didn't think a bad guy would have. Okay. Well, guess what? He found the room and he didn't know the layout of the house. He was just there. Okay. So these absolutes is why people go down these the rabbit holes and investigators that get stuck there and they stay there for 30 years. That's why the Cold Case Foundation exists. We go in and we talk like this and we throw stuff around and go, yeah, that doesn't make sense. Or, yeah, that does make sense. Why is the father cooperating and getting $118,000? Maybe he believed the note. Okay. Maybe there's a lot more going on here that we're not seeing. So friends of the Ramsey and pastors divided their time between Patsy and John. She knew that all these people were in there. Okay, they divided their time. Well, where did they go the other time? Did they go downstairs? Where are the evidence people during all of this stuff? John Ramsey paced between the area of the den and the formal dining room. So you have a father who's nervous. John was usually by himself. I'm not catching, the suspicion here on that one right yet. I did not, because she's writing this post discovery, and she's including her observations of John. And I think she is pushing the limits here. Kind of like French, who wrote the report after the body was found, and he went back and gave excuses as to why he didn't go into the room. Okay. That's what's happening here. She is saying, okay, the body's found. So yeah, you know what? John was walking back and forth. That was weird. I did not see John or Patsy interact with each other. Well, that's because people suffer differently. Karen and I, when we lost Ryan, our son, I can't tell you where Karen was. And she probably can't tell you where I was, because we just learned that our son died. That's very traumatic. I've seen thousands of people go through this. It doesn't mean anything. No one in the house made any obvious comments to me that it was after 10 o'clock hours and the suspected kidnappers had not called. So she's blaming the family for a time frame that she already knows, that she came 10 minutes after the original. Why doesn't she say in here, oh, and by the way, I didn't get here till 8:10? But she's quick to point out that nobody in the family says, hey, it's after 10 o'clock and they haven't called. Well, here's a hint. That's your job. It is not to put the family under, who's already under stress, into a absolute, hey, by the way, you're not following along with the bouncing ball here. Well, yeah, in fact, they are. They're trying to get $118,000. Okay? They're trying to at least meet that piece of the puzzle. Okay? I had a few brief conversations with John. I had asked John if the doors to the house had been locked with the family when the family went to bed last night. John told me that he personally checked all the doors and all the windows in the home this morning. All of the doors and windows were locked. John told me that although the house does have an alarm system, the family has not used the alarm system for months. I asked John who had keys to the residence. John told me his adult son has a key to the house. The son had been in Atlanta since December 15th. The adult son had been attending college at the University of Colorado, Boulder. Another family member, Patsy's mother, also has a key to the residence. Patsy's mother is currently living in Atlanta, Georgia. So they are focused on somebody came into that house with a key. Okay? At least they're trying to, at this point, to run down that lane. John told me there's no hidden keys. I asked John if any keys had been lost or stolen. John told me there had been no stolen or lost house keys. John told me that the housekeeper did have a key to the house, and that blank was the only person living in Colorado who had a key to the Ramsey house. John told me that he and his family had been at a dinner party, blank home of the afternoon and evening of the December 1996. John, Patsy, Burke, and JonBenet had returned home at approximately 2200 hours. John told me that Patsy and Burke immediately went to bed. John had read a book to JonBenet, tucked her into bed, then John went to bed. John said he went to bed at approximately 22:30 hours, 10:30 in the evening. So John told her a lot. So how much of that is she, or was she saying, well, you know what? All that John told me here was true, and we verified it. And all that John told me here was false, and we verified that. Okay. She's got a lot of John told me here, but this is not really relevant to what's going on here because it's lining up. French told her what John told him. French told her what Patsy had told him. Now they're regurgitating the same information, allegedly separate from each other. So they're not, getting their story together based on the time frames, right? If Patsy wakes up at 5:55 and, or the first 911 call comes at 5:55 and she woke up at 5:45, well, that's a 10-minute time frame to get John and say, okay, we need to write a note. We need to get all our ducks lined up. Okay, 118,000. Yeah. Okay, we went to bed at 10 o'clock, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's a tall order. Now, I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm saying that, to keep going down there, you're forgetting about this. Okay, because remember, again, I keep reiterating, this report is written after this child is discovered. So there is a paradigm shift that takes place. And in that paradigm shift, okay, she's writing suspicion in this report. That's what this report is. She is rewriting her observations here. And she's adding a little color to it. And this is why she is adamant to not in any way, shape, or form focus on that. And now, does it look like this is a low risk? Yes, we can all agree on that. There's no question somebody has knowledge about that house. Just like Elizabeth Smart. But do you focus 100% on Elizabeth's dad and her family at that time? Or do you try to think outside of the box, which they did? They were looking at Riki, remember, the RSO. And they ended up kicking his door in. And we were saying that, no. Stay with the house. Stay with the house. It's going to be somebody at the house. Something is going to be coordinated to that house. And lo and behold, the sister, I think 5 or 6 months later, has an aha moment. Oh, I knew who it was. It was the handyman. And that goes right there with the victim risk continuum. Boom. Somebody had access to the house, i.e. they knew the house. It means they knew the layout. But he had done work at that at the smart home. Okay? And that was the first, what we call contact point with the victim. So what you start looking for are contact points to the victim. Okay? And as we discussed in the last, video that I did on this with Dr. Bricado, that the contact point is also so critical because you have to ask yourself, okay, where does the hunter first run across the prey? And if there are other sites outside of this residence that bring you to that information, i.e. the dance studio with the other little girl months later, okay, then you have to look at that very carefully. And you have to say to yourself, wow, wait a minute. That's really interesting. And then you start looking at the cigarettes, remember the Camel Blues, and then you start looking at some of the other stuff. And, you start asking yourself, well, wait a minute, did we get tunnel vision here? Did we as law enforcement go down that lane for a little bit? And if the answer is, if you can say, maybe we did, then you start hearing conversations like this new chief who's going to have a meeting with Mr. Ramsey at the end of this month, who's saying, look, we're open to realizing some of the things we could have done differently. To his credit, to this chief's credit, he is willing to say, we could have done some things different here. And as a result of that, guess what? Those some things may ultimately lead to the suspect. And we don't know who that person could be. Okay? We don't know. If it turns out that, you know what, there's always been a target, okay, fine. That's the truth. That's the results. Okay? But if it turns out 30 years, they've been chasing a rabbit hole, okay, then this report here tells us a tremendous amount. Because here we get into, they're starting to think outside of the box here, the detective. John did tell me there was one employee that he forced to let go about 5 months ago. The name of the employee is blank. John said blah, blah, blah. I asked John which interior lights, if anything, if any, were on when he went to bed on the night, December 25th. John told me no interior lights were on when he went to bed. I asked John which exterior lights were on when he went to bed. John told me that he didn't know if any exterior lights were on. John said the Christmas tree lights located in the front of the house may have been left on, and possibly an exterior light. There are small white Christmas lights lining the side of the sidewalk extending towards the front of the home. These Christmas lights were on when I first arrived at the Ramsey residence. Awesome. Take pictures of them. Okay? And now you'll know what lights are left on and what lights aren't left on. And if you get the guy later on in an interview and, you know, things start going sideways, well, then guess what? You can say, well, you told me A, B, C, and D. Am I wrong or are you wrong? After blank had been named as a possible suspect, I asked John if he had any photos of blank in the house. John Ramsey told he had a roll of film in his camera, so they're looking for a connection, i.e. contact point. Pictures had been taken at a Christmas party held in Ramsey home. That's good. They were thinking outside the box. John told me that blank had attended that party. That's great. I asked John for the film for that camera. He personally provided me with film from the camera. Here's the film of the guy that you're thinking about. Go get it, go get it developed. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to discover my daughter in about 15 minutes. So just give you a heads up. Okay. Do you see how that's not kind of lining up with, something's off base here? Okay. Because by this time, I gave the roll of 35 film to Officer Barry Weiss. I instructed Weiss to have the film developed as soon as possible. I asked John if he had any paperwork in the house that might contain blank's handwriting. So she's 50-50 with the family here. She's still crossing her fingers that this is an actual kidnapping problem. John checked the area for any note, but did not locate anything. I asked John if he had canceled checks, which had been endorsed by blank. John phoned his bank. So he's 100% going with the detective. What else do you need? Well, can you contact your bank, see if they have any canceled checks that he might have signed? Yeah, no problem. I'll get hold of them. You see, he's rolling with this. Okay? I asked John to have his bank fax those checks to me in care of the fax number BP, Detective Bureau. Okay. I asked John and Patsy for current photographs of JonBenet. I explained the photos would be copied and distributed to local law enforcement agencies. I was given 2 8x10 photographs of JonBenet, as well as an 8x10 portfolio of JonBenet containing 2 pictures and her physical description. I gave these photos to Officer Weiss and instructed him to have copies made and relay these copies to Sergeant Larry Mason of the Boulder PD. Officer Weiss and Officer Barco cleared the Ramsey residence around 10:15. So there's people coming and going. At an unknown time between approximately 0900 and 9:45, Detective Robertson arrived at the Ramsey residence. Well, it's not an unknown time if you put 9 to 9:45. Anyway, Sergeant Whitson talked with John Ramsey in the den area of the house. I was present during part of this conversation. Sergeant Whitson informed John Ramsey the FBI had been notified and was assisting in the investigation. Sergeant Whitson told John Ramsey that he would need a sample of his handwriting. John verbally agreed to supply Sergeant Whitson with a handwriting sample. Shortly after Sergeant Whitson had requested the sample, John Ramsey wrote a line on a legal pad in front of him and signed his name to the pad. I was sitting down next to John Ramsey when he wrote this. John has written, "Now is the time for all people," then signed his name. Which is, by the way, right, a standard operating procedure. I removed the sheet of paper from the legal pad. I secured it in my notebook and later placed it into evidence. All right. Officer Barry Weiss left. I asked him to show me what area of the house had been processed for evidence. The first floor glass door located on the north side of the house, east of the spiral staircase, had been processed for latent prints. John Ramsey told me that this was the only door in the house that did not have a deadbolt to secure it. The spiral staircase located at the northwest corner of the house, extending from the first floor to the second floor, was processed for latent fingerprints. There was a green Christmas garland covering the handrail portion of the staircase. At the top of the spiral staircase was an open laundry area. JonBenet's bedroom door was located south of this laundry area. Officer Weiss walked to the patio door located at the south end of JonBenet's bedroom. Officer Weiss told me that there had been frost on the patio when the officers had arrived. The frost had not been disturbed. You see, what they're doing is they're filling in the blanks after the body was discovered. This is how this should have been. This is how this should have gone down. Okay? If they got everybody out of that house, okay, the next step is search the frickin' house. Take photographs. Document everything. Everything. I want photographs of the toilets. I want photographs of the bathtubs. I want photographs of the bedrooms. I want photographs all around. Okay? Those are reference photographs. Okay? Those are overall photographs. Okay? I want photographs of your observations outside. If you say there's no frost out there, take a frickin' photograph of it. I want photographs of cigarette butts. I want egress, inbound, outbound. I want photographs of all the windows, locked and secured. Okay? That's your job. Take photographs. So when I come to you and say, okay, what have we got so far? Okay. Well, I started on the bottom floor and I worked my way up to the top. Or I started at the top and I worked my way at the bottom. Or better yet, if they did it right, I started outside and worked my way in. Okay. And when I got in, I did A, B, C, and D. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, great. No problem. Officer Weiss then walked east to the second floor hallway in the children's playroom area. I noticed there was a life-size Barbie doll standing next to the north window. The doll was not clothed. Why this is relevant, whatever. Continuing east down this hallway, there was a bedroom located on the north side. Don't you think a photograph, later on you could be looking at all these photos and go, Detective Art, to whoever your partner, hey, did you guys notice this? Yeah. Isn't that weird? Yeah. Yeah. And? Well, there's no clothes on the Barbie doll, and it's life size. Do you think the father has an SA propensity with a Barbie doll? Yeah. Okay, well, could JonBenet be dressing that Barbie doll with other clothing? I mean, I don't know. Let's put that in. Let's put that over here in the broken chip pile, and see if we can figure that out. But hey, out of curiosity, yeah, did you notice a garrote around the neck? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, the doll was not clothed. Continuing east down this hallway, there's a bathroom located on the north side of the hallway and a small bedroom located across this bathroom. At the east end of the hallway is Burke's bedroom. Outside of Burke's bedroom is a stairway leading upstairs to the master bedroom. The stairs also leads downstairs to the front door. I walked upstairs into the master bedroom. I did not touch anything in the master bedroom area. I returned to the second floor using the west steps. The west steps entered the second floor area just east of JonBenet's bedroom and just east of the open laundry area. Sergeant Whitson requested the door to JonBenet's room be sealed prior to his arrival. The door to JonBenet's room had been closed but not locked. I obtained a police crime scene tape and adhesive tape from Sergeant Whitson's vehicle. So essentially, she stomps all over the area where if the suspect was an intruder and took her out of the house, she just walked all over where the suspect was. And I hope that area had been already photographed. And, because now she's going to go to outside, get some crime scene tape and put it over the door to the bedroom. Here's a call coming in. That whole bedroom, that whole house is the crime scene. When you have a child abducted out of a home, that's the allegation here. Everybody out. Everybody out. Okay? Sergeant Whitson requests blah, blah, blah. I obtained a police crime scene tape and adhesive tape from Sergeant Whitney's his vehicle. Detective Patterson and I sealed the entrance to JonBenet's room at 10:30 hours. At approximately 10:35, all BPD officers, detectives, and victims advocates cleared the Ramsey residence. The only person remaining in the residence were John Ramsey, Patsy Ramsey, and myself. Okay, so they get there at 6 a.m. and they clear everybody out at 10:35. So what's the math on that? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 4.5 hours, that scene's being contaminated. The defense will have a field day. I talked with John briefly after all the officers had left. John told me that he and Patsy had been married for 16, 17 years, and that Patsy had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer 3 years ago. Patsy recently discovered that she was free of cancer. John's adult daughter had been killed in a car accident 4 years ago. I asked John if there had been any suspicious people at her residence within the last few weeks. John told me no. I asked John if he had received any suspicious phone calls or hang-up phone calls within the last few weeks. Now, here she says John, Patsy, and herself were the only ones in the residence. Everybody was out. Okay. All right. Everybody out. So when I heard that, I thought to myself, well, then how come John's friend is with him when he discovers the body? Where'd that guy come from? I don't know yet. Let's keep moving. Blah, blah, blah. John Ramsey and I were in the den area talking at an unknown time at 10:40 hours. I had placed my copy of the suspected ransom note on the table in the den, and I asked John to review the note. Okay. So this was a ploy. I asked John to tell me what unusual things he detected from reading the note. John Ramsey said very little. So she goes, you know what? I'm going to place this in front of him and then say, hey, John, when you get a chance, read the note about your kidnapped daughter that, by the way, we're waiting for the phone call still to come in. And tell me if there's anything unusual here. She's going to be decapitated. I mean, that's just amateur hour. Okay. If you thought this father was involved in this thing, You don't start laying that kind of stuff on a suspected father of, who may or may not be involved in this at that moment, and drop that on him while he's waiting for the phone call from an alleged kidnapper. That makes no sense to me. And that is definitely not an investigative protocol in any way, shape, or form. Because if that's the case, if I was a defense attorney, the first thing I would say is, detective, can you tell me why all the other officers left the house and left you and mom and dad in the house by yourself? Can you tell me why that happened? Blah, blah, blah. Well, was it to set them up by placing a note in front of them and then having them tell you what was odd about that particular note? I don't know, right? I could see the defense going that direction. I told I asked John Ramsey to tell me what unusual things he detected from reading the note. He said very little. But now she says John Ramsey's friends asked me my opinion of the note. Wait a minute. Up here, she just said everybody was kicked out of the house. And down here, she adds Ramsey's friends into the house at this note. DLR. Clarity of focus, not here. We're reading it here. You're looking at it yourself, folks. John Ramsey's friends asked me my opinion of the note. I told John Ramsey's friends that the note appeared to be directed towards John Ramsey. So am I to believe that, which statement am I to believe here? That the only persons remaining in the residence were John Ramsey, Patsy Ramsey, and is this all the other people that were left in the friends, these blacked out people were left in the house, but all detectives, victims advocates, and officers were kicked out of the house? So does she leave all of the friends in the house and kicked out all the cops? Shouldn't it have been the other way around? Because what she's doing here is she's saying, you know what? I don't like this note. You tell me what's wrong with it. And even the friends picked up on it and said, well, you're the detective. What's unusual with the note? They challenged her on it. John Ramsey's friend asked me my opinion of the note. Well, yeah, duh. You're the detective. You tell us what you think is wrong with the note. Okay? John Ramsey, I told John Ramsey's friend that the note appeared to be directed towards John. Okay? The note also appeared to be personal, as it referenced to John Ramsey, a John throughout the note. Now, Police Work 101, if you think that guy is the suspect or somebody in that circle that you have around them wrote the note, okay, don't give them any clues. Don't pull them in and say, hey, John, this seems to be personal to you. So is somebody in this room that person, John? Is that where we're going here? So look here. John Ramsey's friend made the following observation about the note. She's letting the friends now weigh in on a kidnap for ransom note. You can't make this stuff up. Why didn't you just copy the note, which you did, and supply it to the entire neighborhood and get an opinion? Get an opinion here. Because look here. He says, the friend says, I told John Ramsey's friend that the note appeared to be directed towards John Ramsey. The note also appeared to be personal, as it referred to John Ramsey as John throughout the note. Well, she's been calling him John. in her report. Is that personal? John Ramsey's friend made the following observations. The author of the note directed the note to John Ramsey. The amount of $118,000 was an odd amount. You know, Detective, when I read this note, I think it's weird that they directed it to John and that the amount was $118,000. Okay, well, let's put you up on the stand as an expert, okay, in psychology of those who write notes. The FBI has tens of thousands of notes written by bank robbers, suspected, kidnappers. They collect them. They still have them. Okay. And it's sent back to Quantico. And these guys and gals make that determination. You don't ask the friend that's sitting there with the father and the mother, who you may have suspected wrote this note, which later on it comes out. That's exactly what she says. And you say, what's your opinion? Okay. Pastor, you weigh in here, Pastor. You've been trained in, behavioral analysis. The author of the note appeared to be somewhat educated, since the words hence and attaché were used. By the way, this is coming from the friend. This is not coming from a police authority. But the internet and the world has grabbed on all of this, that these two words were unusual. Okay. And because she puts it right there, Ramsey's friends, plural, made the following observations about the note. The author of the note directed the note to John Ramsey. The amount of and this is why I've had a problem with the note. The amount of $118,000 was an odd amount. The author of the note appeared to be somewhat educated, since the words hence and attaché were used. The sentence, "Don't try to grow a brain, John," seems to be a slap in the face to John Ramsey. The closure victory, SBTC, did not make sense. And the reference to John Ramsey being a Southerner indicated to the friends the person did not know John Ramsey because John was originally from Michigan. These are the friends weighing in on the power of the note. I can't wait to Steve Johnson look at this thing and give us some other weigh-ins here. Okay? Everybody has missed this for years. Okay? It wasn't the Ramseys and the detective and the police saying, you know what, this note, here's the reasons why we think this is falling apart. It was her feeding the investigators, because she walked out of there and said, and I can guarantee you it happened. I don't know if she testified about it in the grand jury, but I don't know if anybody caught it. That, isn't it true, Detective? Aren't you? You passed the note around and asked for opinions about that note, didn't you? Yes, sir. And what were the opinions you heard? Because we're going to get each one of those people on the stand. And once you got those opinions, you debriefed with everybody, didn't you? Yes, I did. And what did you say? Well, I said that the friend said all of this information. So law enforcement didn't say that. No, sir, they didn't. But rather the friends of John Ramsey said it. Yes, sir, that's correct. No further questions. I asked John Ramsey if he had given a loan to anyone in the amount of $118,000. John said he had not. I asked John if he owed $118,000. John said he did not. So she gets from John's friends in the house that theoretically shouldn't have even been there, this whole idea about the $118,000 being an odd amount came from a group of people that were around John Ramsey. And they took that and have been running with it and try to connect that 118,000 to, bonuses, to all this other stuff. Okay. But they got it from, quite frankly, John Ramsey's friends, and which would include himself. He's sitting there. She's sitting there, according to this, mom and dad. And the friends are going, John, that's a weird amount. You know what we're not hearing? Maybe John was sitting there going, yeah, you're right. What's up with that? That's weird. You see, that's being balanced here with the potato chip. Okay. Let's balance with the potato chip here for a moment. Okay. And I wonder what Patsy was saying when the friends were saying all of this. She was there. She was present. Okay. And so now we get at an unknown time at approximately 10:40 and 1200, John Ramsey left the house and picked up the family mail. I was not present when John left. Then how do you know he went out and got the mail, and why is it in your report? I did witness John Ramsey opening his mail in the kitchen. Blank also left the Ramsey home. So you still got people coming and going. And by the way, John went and got his mail. Okay. Blank left sometime after 10:15. Oh, by the way, he went and got his mail, but I didn't see him go get it. But he must have gotten it. So you see that's speculation. That's conjecture. He's reading his mail, so he must have gone and get it. So at some point, unknown time between 10:40 and 1200 hours, John must have gone and gotten his mail because now he's reading it. Okay. Hey, what do you guys think about this note? You see the incompetency taking place here right before our eyes? Okay. Like, remember Transformers? Right before your eyes? Okay. She is writing her report post discovery of JonBenet's body, and she's justifying her mistakes. That's what's happening in this report. And if she was one of my detectives, I would be having the exact same conversation with her. And I would ask her, well, why is it important for you to put John went out and got his mail? And by the way, you didn't even know what time he did it. Well, I just thought that was suspicious. Okay, great. Then write it. What was suspicious about it? Not that he went and got his mail. Tell us why it was suspicious in your mind as a detective. What is going on here? Okay. He told me he had taken photographs of the Christmas party held at the Ramsey home on the 23rd. Blank left to have the film developed in a 1-hour photo lab. Remember those? You just drive up and drop off your film. Okay. What, this police department doesn't have their own photo lab? You're going to go out and now take this film that you think may be evidentiary in nature and hand it to the guy at the Kodak shop and say, hey, I'll be back in an hour. Okay. Yes, sir. What do you got? Oh, it's just a missing kid down the street. Run this up, would you? Okay. A Blank returned within 30 minutes to an hour. At approximately noon, Patsy relocated to the den area. So Patsy moved from one room to the next, and she documented it. Patsy laid down on the couch in the den. Blank remained with Patsy. Blank also stayed with Patsy. Blank, 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 and John Ramsey were in the kitchen area and formal dining area of the house. Patsy asked me what we, i.e. the police, were doing. Well, that's a great question from Mom. What are you guys doing? Have you searched the house? Have you looked everywhere? Because, by the way, there's a body in the basement. Okay. I know she's there because I'm involved. And my husband's involved and my son's involved. our family's involved. Okay? No, that's not what's happening here. She's asking them because she's out of gas that her child is missing. And she does not know what's going on. She's been medicated by this point, according to testimony later. Okay. And she's out of it and she's going, what are you guys doing? What's happening here? Please help us. Now, this would have been the part where, the people the evidence techs who were searching and documenting everything in the house and even went down, here's a hint, to the basement, okay, and took photographs of an open window with a suitcase in front of it. Okay, that's a hint. Okay. Those individuals would have opened that door because somebody opened the door, but they couldn't find the switch. Remember that part? Okay. But you know what? I opened the door, but I didn't turn the light on, so I couldn't see anything. Okay. Well, this would have been the part, the time to say, you know what? We've searched the entire house. We've done it once. We've done it twice. Actually, we've done it 3 times since we've been here for the last 4.5 hours controlling this scene, i.e. the cops are here waiting for the phone call. Okay. But in this detective's mind, it's, John didn't say it's past 10 o'clock. So I think that's suspicious. In fact, I also see him going out to get his mail. That's suspicious as well. That's a problem for me because I'm, Ace Ventura, pet detective. I told Patsy that we were attempting to locate blank. I also told Patsy the FBI was involved in the investigation. Patsy had asked me these questions when I initially spoke with her. So this is past tense. She's putting it in there as if, she's, what else is going on? And she's saying, well, I'd already told you that. I told you the, blah, blah, blah. So that's suspicious to her that she's asking the question again. Patsy asked me these questions when I initially spoke with her. Patsy talked to me about the suspected ransom note. Patsy told me that blank did not use the language contained within the note. Patsy explained to me that blank did not use the words hence or attaché case. Patsy did not know why someone would ask for the amount of $118,000. Patsy said the amount had no significance to her. Patsy asked me why the author of the note had not asked for a larger sum of money, or at least a round sum of money. Isn't that one of the conclusions that the cops come to as well? Even the FBI testified that, usually this kind of amount here is unusual. Usually they ask for bigger numbers. Well, the mother asked the same question, just like the investigators. Okay. The mother says, well, I wonder why it was only $118,000. Don't they usually ask for larger amounts? Okay. You notice she's not answering the comments or the questions back to Patsy like she just did a minute ago, where she says, well, yeah, but I told you that when I first got here, that the FBI is involved. Patsy said the author of the note referred to John as being a Southerner. Well, no, the friends just said that because she was there and she heard it. All the friends are the ones that said, they don't even know you're from Michigan. They think you're a Southerner. And so Patsy just regurgitates what she just heard in the room a little while ago. Patsy told me that anyone who knows John Ramsey knows he's not from the South. Yeah, they've had that conversation already. And by the way, Detective Arndt is right there when it's happening. In fact, she asked them, hey, what's your opinion on this? What's this? What's your opinion? I asked Patsy when Blank was next scheduled to be at their home, which is going to be the housekeeper. Blank was due to be at the Ramsey at 9 o'clock on Friday, December 27. That was to pick up the check. It's very consistent. While I was talking to Patsy, she would repeatedly start crying. Patsy was unable to speak. She repeatedly asked, why didn't I hear my baby? She looked physically exhausted. Her eyes would close, but she was not able to rest or sleep. I talked briefly with John Ramsey during the morning of December 26. He was able to carry on a conversation and articulate his words. So now she goes from describing mothers being distraught to John. That I need to tell you this because it's this part, my part in the report, that's fitting my narrative, my prescription to my diagnosis. He carried on a conversation. He was articulate, or was able to articulate his words. He smiled, joked, and seemed to focus during the conversation. Patsy seemed to be less focused when I spoke with her. Well, no kidding. You just said she's laying on the couch asking why she didn't hear her baby. But John seemed to be fine. Patsy seemed to be less focused when I spoke. Patsy seemed to have a far-off look in her expression. Kind of like my thumbnail. Patsy's thoughts were scattered, and it was difficult to get her to stay focused on one thought. So she's doing a behavioral analysis of a mother whose child in her mind is still missing, maybe abducted, maybe, there's a lot of maybes going on there. But you notice she's focusing on the person. She's not focusing on the information. She's focusing on the person. And who is she focusing on? She's focusing on John, and she's focusing on Patsy. Okay? All kinds of red flags here from the detective, in my opinion. Okay? Because she's going down this lane. Okay? It was difficult to get her to focus on one thought. Patsy would collapse in tears and repeatedly ask why she'd not been able to hear her baby. There were 2 phone calls received by John when I saw him act differently than he had all morning. When he received each of these phone calls, John stood in front of the north door located between the den and the kitchen. John looked outside during the phone call. John told the caller JonBenet had been kidnapped. John was sobbing and had difficulty speaking. At times, John was unable to speak. I was told by friends that the identity of the 2 callers, one caller was John Ramsey's son and John Andrew Ramsey. The other call was John Ramsey's daughter, Melinda Ramsey. Now, this is a father who received phone calls from his children and has an emotional block and breakdown. And she describes it as a time that he was different throughout the whole morning. Okay. I can tell you when my daughter called us, I was at Disneyland. And my daughter called me and Karen. I picked up the phone. It was a cell call. And she's screaming, "Dad, Ryan's dead. Ryan's dead." I can tell you what that feels like. People react differently. It doesn't mean it's suspicious behavior. And she was looking through the lens of diagnose, because I've already prescribed. And she's reversing her report and her thought process post the baby being found to justify what she believes is suspicious activity and behavior. Okay? That's what's happening here. She's witnessing a father and a mother emotionally distraught. Now, I would submit to you, if one of those detectives had walked up and discovered that baby and walked upstairs, they would have had a different observation of these parents if the police would have found JonBenet in that room. If the cops had found JonBenet in that room, these parents would have had an emotional breakdown. I promise you that. Okay? At that time. Now, that's not the way history, the universe took this case. Okay? But I would submit to you, wouldn't we have seen a different response from the family? Would we have seen a father 35 years later saying, "I still want justice for my daughter. I want to talk to the cops. I want every piece of evidence tested. I want DNA. And finally, we have a police chief who has the guts and the chutzpah to say, you know what, Mr. Ramsey, we're going to meet with you. And we're going to tell you what we're doing with all the new technology that we have today. And whatever the result is, if it points to anybody, whoever that person is, then I think the law enforcement is positioned today in a much better place than they were the day this was being written. Because again, this is another example of, we're talking about the family and she feels that she has to put in there, this is the only time I see him shift his behavior. Okay. As if the other behavior is out of context for the totality of the circumstances. So I want to get down here. Well, you know what? I'm 3 hours into this. I'm going to pick this up again tomorrow night. I am not going to miss that I am on page 11. Okay. I think this is a lot that we've gone over tonight, but I'm going to pick it up again tomorrow. Okay. On page 11. And I just think we need to, with this new evidence coming, whatever the results are going to be, we just need to accept it, whatever that is. Okay. And if it points in any direction, then that's what it is. Okay? That's what it is. But right now, I think the most important piece of this puzzle is right here in front of us, and it has been in front of us from day one. Again, I'm not saying that the note is not significant and or important. That's not what I've been saying here. Okay? I'm just saying, let's start with what is the most obvious and most important piece of evidence. And this is that evidence. You tie this together, somebody had a specific intent to kill that child and to apply this garrote 4 separate times. But why? Why? Why did the investigators ignore the why on this device? Instead, they started to look at it was it was part of a cover-up. You know how we know it's not part of a cover-up? Let me see here. Right here. You see this indentation, this mark? That is this garrote being applied here. And it ends up here. So that means the suspect is applying this device. And the ME's report is clear. It was applied multiple times. Well, why is the suspect doing this? Not how is he doing it. We see the how. But why multiple times? And I would submit to you that is correlated to SA. You ask any expert in the world. If you go ask Vernon Gabert, who's like the godfather of homicide investigation, SA, from NYPD, the guy's worked over like 8,000 cases. He's unbelievable. Okay? He's trained. He's written 5 books about it. I guarantee you, he would say, there's a problem with this here in River City. Okay? And this has been the elephant in the living room, or, whatever. This has been something that has always bothered me from the day I had the phone call with Lou Schmidt back in 1997. And he told me, guess what? The murder weapon here is a garrote, and it was self-made in the basement with 2 pieces of broken paintbrush. And by the way, that paintbrush could have been used to assault her in her private parts. Now, I don't know about you, but that said, in of itself, okay, that's a huge problem. That's a huge problem. So, if you get a chance, go look at the last one that Dr. Picotto and I did. And if you were invading a home with an adult male, John, whilst they are in or waiting for them to come home, would it be logical to take some form of protection in case you're discovered? Right. Great question. Yes, that is always a possibility. But a lot of these guys, remember this particular situation here, and thank you so much for your kindness, was, the suspect didn't have a kill kit, right? What we would call a kill kit, where, they go in, they're pre-prepared, like a Dennis Rader, those kind of guys, right? This guy was spontaneous in relationship to, getting the kid. And we can go on for hours just talking about the whys on just that concept in and of itself. So go watch the last one with Dr. Picotto that I had. And Gary's been sick, or I would have had him here tonight. But this is really still problematic for me. And thank you, Tina. Great to see you. One more question here. Was there any other case in the air part of which garrote was used, and any other where someone named the reports have lived since? That is a great question, Willie. I know that there was a post-incident, which I think everybody, was curious about, and that was the other little girl who was SA'd. Mom interrupted it. It was about 6 or 7 months after JonBenet, and the father, was pushing the agency at the time to compare some cigarette butts that were found in the alley behind their house. So that little girl was actually assaulted, and the suspect completed the assault. Mother came in, hit him with some mace, and the suspect fled. That report, just kind of went by the wayside. And yet, those are the kind of things that you want to kind of look for in terms of a correlation point, right? Are these two events correlated in any way, shape, or form? And if they are, why? What's going on here? Do we have somebody at that time, in the neighborhood, and could it be the same suspect? And you have to kind of, take that as another pretzel on the table and see if it fits, into the potato chip puzzle in any way, shape, or form. So, yeah, great question. And the answer to that, obviously, is yes, they could for sure take their own weapons. But in this particular case, it looks like, the fact that the paintbrush originated from the shop there, i.e. in the basement. I'm not going to say that the suspect wouldn't have had a taser, but I'm not convinced of that personally. And what those marks are, could they be taser? They could be. Could they be burn marks? Maybe. There's a lot of wide variety of opinions on that. I've seen both personally in my experience, and I would leave that up to more qualified experts than me. But my experience told me the one on her neck, when we look at that one picture, to me, that looked like a cigarette burn. But, I'm not an ME. Okay? And, I've heard other MEs say, yeah, it does look like a cigarette burn. And I've heard other people say, no, that kind of looks like a taser burn or some type of electrical burn of some sort. Either way, I think the consensus is it's a burn. How it got there, did the suspect bring an item? Possible. Did it originate from the home? Maybe. Was he smoking? Possible. So those are all in the pretzel category, for lack of a better term. And you'll understand that if you were here earlier in the conversation. So again, thank you to our mods. Thank you to our subscribers, each and every one of you, our Patreon members. Without this, Without you being here, we couldn't do this. And we're grateful for you. Part 2, we're going to run tomorrow night. Okay. Karen doesn't know that yet, but I just think it's important that we break this down, very methodically, and then we don't jump, through too many other hoops here with, any more conversations. So I hope you've had a good night, and I hope you've had a good week since New Year's. May God bless you, each and every one of you, and I'll see you tomorrow night. Have a good one.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away.